Okay, Baltimore City Council Budget and Appropriations Committee. We're here for fiscal year 2020 budget for Department of Transportation, or DOT. I'm Eric Costello, councilman from the 11th District and chair of the committee. To my immediate left is Councilman Leon Pinkett, 7th District, vice chair of the committee. Council President Brandon Scott. Councilman Chris Burnett, 8th District. Councilman Yitzi Schleifer, 5th District, member of the committee. To my right, Council Vice President Sharon Green Middleton, 6th District, member of the committee. Councilwoman Shannon Sneed, 13th District, member of the committee. And Councilman Bill Henry, 4th District, member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To my immediate right is Marguerite Curran, staff to the committee. We are also joined by somewhere Kimberly Rubens and Michael Huber, Chief of Staff to Council President Scott. We have Jeff Amoros, who is representing Mayor Jack Young. Frank, before we get started, if you could introduce each of your staff and then jump into your presentation. I know we have parking authority here in a support capacity. Colleagues, I'm going to ask that we keep all of our questions related to parking authority for the parking service when that comes up. I believe that's tomorrow or Thursday. Might even be Friday. But if there is anything DOT related where parking comes up, then we'll ask Mr. Little to come up. So Frank, if you could introduce your team, and then how long is your presentation? How many pages?
Yeah, 20 services. And I got a couple remarks, but they'll be quick.
Okay, yeah, if we keep the presentation to about 15 minutes, that would be greatly appreciated.
Should be able to do that.
Let's take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, and Mr. President, and members of the council. My name is Frank Murphy. I'm the Acting Director of Transportation for Baltimore City. This is my third run at this title, so hopefully I'll get it right this time if I didn't before.
And Frank, take an inch or two back from the mic. So
I'm used to playing music, and you have to get all the way up on the mic sometimes when you do that. So.
Couple inches away so we can hear you, especially the folks at home watching on TV.
Let's see, we have Mr. Theo Ngongong, Deputy Director for Policy and Transit, joining me up here. In the row behind, from the far side, Charles Penny, our Chief of Transit. Amma Bindi, our Chief Project Officer. Kenny Ching, our Operations Bureau Chief. DK Dhirendra Sinha, he's our Chief Fiscal Officer. Ebony, Chief of Staff. Liam, our Legislative Executive. In the row behind, Charles Turner, who runs our Photo Enforcement Unit. Tavon Braxton, the Conduit Chief. Bimal Devkota, Engineering and Construction Chief. Herman Vihl, our PIO Chief, Public Communications Director. In the row behind, we have Tim Knight, Right-of-Way Services Division Chief, which is permits and the like. And Peter, who's joined us from the Parking Authority. Thanks, Peter, for coming by.
Frank, I'm not trying to make fun, but please, like 6 inches back.
Wow,
like
this
even
is more
a little
powerful than I
further.
realized. There's better mics than I had in my band, I guess.
No, you're doing it again, Frank. Like, there you go. That's perfect.
Okay. Let's see, who did I forget in the back? Starting from this end, we have Toby, our Enforcement Chief, Damien from Traffic, and Raj from Traffic Signals. HR. That's right, it's NJ, and one of those names, the initials is easier to say than the name. That's like DK. Anyway, so a couple quick things about Department of Transportation. We are transitioning from a kind of traditional department to the environment of complete streets. As you all know, there was the law passed earlier, a couple months back, and so we are kind of gearing up to go more into where we are pay more attention to pedestrian transit, alternative transportation activities than simply cars and trucks. So one thing a lot of you may not know is a lot of these things were programs that I brought to the city in years past in my career. First, the first bike lanes that were put in Baltimore City were put on Ford Avenue by myself when I was in traffic division. In the transit, I used to chair the bus operations committee where we met with the MTA to solve problems they had with buses making turns and the like. I worked on the light rail, helped design the signals. As you probably know, we have these white signals where it's a horizontal or vertical bar, so that the drivers won't think they're their signals like the way the California drivers do, because the light rail signals out there are red and green. Worked on the metro. I had the first transit signal priority installed in the city on the Howard Street corridor for light rail. I was the one that brought traffic calming to Baltimore. The first neighborhood we did was Hunting Ridge. Angle parking was another program that I started in the city, wrote the criteria for it, and those have been used widely, of course, in South and Southeast Baltimore. Traffic, okay, I guess that's enough about me. I've been around here a lot of years, and some people don't know what I've done in past years. So, having said that, let's start the presentation. Wow. They made this print for somebody younger than me. So first, yes, street lighting service. This year, the recommended amount's $21.6 million. And this does not count the LED
Frank,
conversions that we're doing.
I'm sorry, but I really can't hear you. Trust me, the mics are very sensitive. It may not sound like it to you, but it's catching you.
Thanks. So the street lighting, the recommended dollar amount, $21.6 million, which is last year was $22.9. A slight decrease. We've gotten some energy savings. There'll be maintenance savings as we go along because the LEDs don't burn out as quickly. Conduit system management. Conduit, of course, you know, Baltimore is one of the few places with a conduit under the streets that carries the cable, the fiber optic, and the like. Recommended amount this year, $12.308 million. As you probably know, this is an enterprise fund, so it generates the money that pays for all the improvements. The last year was $11.9 million. DOT administration, which is our HR, fiscal, IT. This year, $9.67 million, which is a decrease from last year, which was $10.8. Street management, which is resurfacing and the like. Big dollar item, $33.3 million, which is $1 million ahead of last year, which was $32.2. And I'm sure that all of the council members understand I'm sure a lot of the calls that you get are about streets needing repairs. So we appreciate the extra $1 million to get a little more resurfacing done. Yeah, thanks. Guess today I can't chew gum and walk. Thanks, Liam. Traffic management, which includes improvements to the traffic management center, $12 million. That's actually comparable to last year, which was 12.1. Special event support. Last year was 1.5 million. It's up a little bit to 1.7. Guess everybody knows about that one. Assume you all have enough. You don't need me to go over the details of the slides. Inner Harbor Services. We used to have a separate unit that did inner harbor maintenance. We've combined them with our other yards for efficiencies, but we still break out the service. $1.4 million actually last year and this year. A lot of maintenance in the inner harbor area. Snow and ice control, which we know is always a guess. And somewhat of a placeholder. We appreciate that you understand that if we have a big year, we'll be back having to ask for extra money. But last year we didn't have to do that, and so hopefully we'll be lucky again this year with not a lot of snow. Vehicle impounding and disposal. Since the VRI initiatives have started, our numbers have trended up. We're actually getting close to being full in our impound yard. $8 million this year, 7.9 last year, so that's pretty much static. Sustainable transportation. Now this is an area there's been some fluctuations. We are getting close to the permanent contract for the circulator. We've been in an emergency contract mode since the Veolia contract ran out. We do have some performance measures I want to call your attention to in the miles of new bike infrastructure. We have FY19 target, and we do expect to hit the 10, but not by July 1st. By the end of this construction season, we expect to hit that. And next year, actually, the number in there should have been 5.9 instead of the 10, which we will hit next construction season. Public rights-of-way management, median maintenance and the like, 3.8 million last year, about 9 million this year. That's fairly static. Bridge and culvert maintenance, 3.6 million this year. That is up a bit from last year, and that does vary somewhat depending on the needs. Parking enforcement. This is something where we're going to be making changes moving forward to be able to support the parking, some of Pete's initiatives of pay by license plate, pay by tag, pay by credit card. So this requires new ticket writers so that we can have up-to-date data. It also will help us with even more up-to-date information to catch stolen vehicles and the like. Survey control, kind of a small amount, 272,000. Replace survey points. Dock master, the amount of numbers of dockings have come down a bit. We don't know whether that's due to some of the bad press that the city's gone through in the last year or not. We hope that trends back up. 148,000. Street cut management, recommended $1 million. This is something we've done a lot with a very small staff. I like to tell the story about I was walking my dog down my street and I saw a failed utility cut, and I called our street cut management folks, and the next day they had the contractor repair it. So, good job. Traffic safety, 19 million. That is up a bit. Includes the cameras. Real property management, 2.3 million. That's actually down from last year, which was 2.6. And that's all our services. So I've got all the members of the team here for any questions.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Council President Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Director, for all your hard work.
Thank you, sir.
And I know you're working hard because I haven't bumped into you in Giant recently. So, Mr. Director, we are currently in the first year of the implementation of my equity assessment program. Have you or the agency hired or identified an equity coordinator? And if so, who is this person?
Yeah, you want to take that?
Oh, Theo, you can, and Frank, you can take a seat if you want.
There's no mic right there.
Or Theo, if you want to move one down, or you guys want to share a mic, but Frank, you can take a seat.
There you go. Mr. President, Mr. Chair, thanks for the opportunity. As of right now, as the Chief of Planning and Policy, I am the equity officer for the Department of Transportation.
Oh, thank you.
I'm also managing the complete street process. That definitely requires us to look at it from an equity standpoint.
Thank you for that. And you are a direct report to the director, correct?
That's correct.
Great. Thank you. Somebody actually is following the law. Follow up to that, Theo, have you scheduled any trainings for the department on equity and inclusion? And also, has the agency conducted its baseline analysis of the equity impacts of your policies and practices?
Mr. President, the very short answer is not yet, but it is in the works. It just so happened that it coincides with us as we progress in putting together the complete street report that has the manual itself calls for equity assessment. So we are in the process of putting that together as we progress through the development of the manual.
So also, thank you for that. And I work with Councilman Dorsey on that legislation and trying to make sure that these both of those important bills work very hand in hand. But also would like to just remind you that your baseline analysis, you've already identified the equity coordinator, but your baseline equity analysis is actually due to the council by October the 17th of this year. And then on that same note, last year they were talking to us about the equity study that was commissioned by the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board. When can we expect to receive a copy of this, if anyone knows about it?
Mr. President, a copy of?
Yes. Last year, when I asked that question, we were told that there was the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board was conducting an equity study.
I'll have my chief transit address that.
I'm hoping, Council President.
Mr. Penny, you have to identify yourself.
I'm sorry, forgive me for my ignorance on this, and this cord's not working. My name is Charles Penny. I'm the Chief of Transit and Sustainable Transportation. If this is regarding the study, I think it is. It's the BRTB study. We do have a consultant that's tasked to do the scope of work. We just haven't received NCP yet, so hopefully by the end of the year we can have a study completed. But it's for a gap analysis from a transportation perspective, so we have wrapped in the equity component.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to following up. We will say that you guys, well, we're not pleased where you are. You are very much so ahead of the progress of most of the agencies so far, but we look forward to working with you to make sure that all the deadlines are met. Second question is unrelated to equity. I want to have a question related to the rental rate increase for BGE to use the city's conduit system. How does the new rate of $2.20 per linear foot compare to other cities, and how did DOT decide upon this rate? Did DOT, in the course of its negotiations, conduct a rate study?
Thanks. We're going to bring up Tavon Braxton, our conduit chief.
Good evening, Council. I'm Tavon Braxton, the Conduit Division Chief. Would you mind repeating the question?
Yes, sir. How does the rate of $2.20 per linear foot compare to other cities, especially cities that are like Baltimore, like in size, like in population? And how did DOT decide upon this rate? And did DOT, in the course of its negotiations, conduct a rate study?
Yes, we definitely conducted a rate study. Initially, the rates that we wanted was a lot higher than the $2.20. We established a rate that was closer to $3.33, and that was more of the median range of comparable cities. But through the litigation, we actually had to settle at the current rate.
So can you talk about how we went from 333 to 220? And also, I don't know, Mr. Sinema, if you guys were involved in that at all? And you guys don't have to cover for people who are no longer in elected office, so feel free.
Right, so I was not personally involved in that discussion. I know that the rate was much lower. We set the rate at over $3, and then it came back down. So even the $2.20 was a significant increase from what we were charging before. But I was not personally involved in those negotiations at that time.
So, Mr. Braxton, were you involved in the negotiations?
Well, no, it was mainly representatives of the law department. It was Victor Tavala, Matthew Naden, who neither of which are here today.
Okay, so you think that this is significantly lower than the rate that other cities are getting for this same usage?
Not necessarily. Like I said, I think the rate that currently exists is more of the median. We don't think it's necessarily where we want to be, but this is the first step to getting to the rate where we want to be. Even the $2.20 is actually going to be instituted in 2020. The current rate is actually $2. So next year it becomes $2.20, and then we're up for renegotiations in the settlement agreement at the end of 2022. So there's the potential for the rate to be increased pending our performance for the past 5 years.
Okay, so humor me for a second.
Sure.
Do you know what the rate is for DC and Philadelphia?
I don't, but they don't own the conduit system.
Okay. For a city that owns the closest city like Baltimore that owns the conduit, give us some examples of what their rates are.
It's varying. I think in New York City, I think it's $7, but in another comparable city, it's $1 and some change, I believe.
Okay, so Mr. Ambrose, we want to make this a follow-up question, mainly for law, since apparently law negotiated something for agency and the agency had no involvement in it, which is very troubling for me to begin with. Want to see what the comparable cities are and how much they charge for their conduit, and how on earth we went from asking for $3.33 to coming down to $2.20. And we want a detailed explanation of how that happened. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm done for now.
Thank you, Mr. President. This question's for, I think, Frank and Liam and anyone else who may know this, but we had a cybersecurity incident, obviously, on May 6th. When was the first time that you received communication from the city CIO, Frank Johnson, after that incident? It's okay to say nothing, because that's what many agencies said.
Monday. Or Tuesday. Tuesday, right? Yeah, I believe it was Tuesday, but I can't remember what time of day it was. Charles, do you know when we heard about that? When we got, Charles Turner? When we got word of the, right, ransomware attack?
Can you grab a mic, sir? Yep.
Charles also serves as our IT chief.
Perfect.
Yeah, my first, hi, I'm Charles Turner, the acting chief for DOT IT. The first conversation I had in reference to this was just a call from BCIT.
When was that call?
The day after the attack.
Okay, and you,
Was to, have everyone come off of the system and the whole protocol that we all followed.
have you had regular communication with BCIT since the incident?
Yes, I sit on the emergency management team. We've had conference calls and communications every day, keeping us in the loop on where they are with their protocols, and we're in a restoration process currently.
So they've been keeping you in the loop?
Yes, every day.
So that makes one of us. In terms of, you obviously suffered an email outage. Were you given an offer by BCIT to create email addresses for you, or were you given guidance to create your own email addresses in violation of Google's terms of service, as we were?
We were asked, initially we were using personal emails internally, and then we were told to use the Google platform.
Okay.
But no clear instructions came with that.
No clear instructions, just told
Other than to create the accounts.
just to create the accounts, nothing on naming conventions or who should be creating accounts or anything like that.
No clear instructions.
Okay.
We created those internal to DOT as
Okay.
far as what the syntax should be.
Okay, and did you experience an email outage over the weekend, as many members of the city council did?
This past weekend,
Yes.
not on my Google account, no.
No, on your city account. Is your city?
My city account has not been restored.
You haven't
sir.
been restored yet.
Correct.
Okay, and did Gmail shut down your temporary Gmail accounts on or around Thursday, May 23rd?
I had a temporary outage and then it recovered.
You what?
I had a temporary. I did not get any emails on my Gmail for a period of time, and then it recovered.
So it was suspended and then it was restored?
Correct.
And did you get any communication from BCIT about Gmail suspending those accounts or when those accounts would be restored?
The only notification I got was through the local news.
Through the local news?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's talk about the circulator. What is the status of the awarding of a contract?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to bring Colby McFarland to answer that question. If you don't have the answer.
Excellent.
Colby?
Good evening, everyone. Kobe McFarland, Transit Administrator, DOT. So the status of the circulator contract, we are at a deal with the vendor. The BOE memo is prepared, and we are expecting to have it before the Board of Estimates on June the 12th.
Okay, and this is RMA?
That's correct.
Okay. I have a slew of very quick questions
Sure.
on that. If my colleagues will indulge me for about 2 or 3 minutes. Because I'm breaking my own rule about 2 questions. Rule broken now. What is the plan for the buses? Are we going to be purchasing? Are we going to be leasing? How's that going to be handled?
That is correct. So the plan for the buses is to essentially increase our fleet. Right now, the city owns 12 buses, which are nearly 6, 7 years old, so they're reaching their useful life. So what we've done is, as a part of the contract, we've purchased 6 new buses this year, and then next year we're also going to purchase 6 new buses. And the reason why we're doing that is because, for example, we have 12 buses now that all need to be replaced at the same time. So this is basically a fleet management strategy.
What do we need for the total fleet? 20 buses to maintain current level of service?
24, with a spare ratio of 20%.
Okay, so we have 20 buses running at any given time, correct?
Between 18 to 20, that's correct.
Okay. And what are we owning the buses, or is the operator going to earn?
We own the buses. At the moment, we are using some of their buses, which we're leasing from them, but we're purchasing transit-style buses.
Is there a reason why a business decision was made to own the buses after what happened the last time that we purchased buses?
Yes, there is. So we looked for buses to lease. There is essentially no market for lease buses because most municipalities get federal funds to purchase buses. So buses are essentially operated until they meet their useful life, which is 12 years of 500,000 miles. So we reached out to a leasing company. They would in turn have had to go and order buses to lease to us, so it would have been more expensive to do it that way.
Okay, and are we going to see any reductions in service, either in terms of headways or number of stops or any of the 4 routes?
So also as a part of this contract, we are rehabbing our existing buses. We're putting new seats in. We're doing some mid-life engine overhauls. We are replacing the hybrid battery systems. We're doing some body work. So we're doing just, things to rehab them to help them reach the 12-year useful life. So there are some service interruptions as we go through this process, but over the next few months, you'll see our fleet increase and headways will become more frequent.
Okay, but we're not going to see an elimination of a route or a reduction in the number of buses operating on a route, correct?
At the moment, there are no plans that I'm aware of to eliminate any routes. So our fleet is essentially day by day. So for instance, when it's really cold outside, when you go to start the buses up, some buses may not start. So some days the fleet may operate at 12 to 14 buses. Some days it may operate at 8 to 10 buses. So that's the reason why we're trying to get the maintenance on the buses more consistent, and that way we can operate with a more consistent number of buses on the roads.
Bob, is there a way to utilize some type of debt service instrument to front load the purchase of all 12 buses?
So we could do that, but what we have, if you remember back going many years now, we've always insisted on having a part of the budget be dedicated to building a fund for bus replacement. So we have accumulated some funds that will be used, and we're budgeting. It's part of the total budget here, which is about $14 million for bus replacement. So it is a possibility. We have looked at it, but we feel like, as DOT has said, it's more beneficial for us to purchase those and then make sure we take care of them so we can stretch the useful life.
So I guess I'm not sure that directly answered the question, but the question is, let me ask it a different way, pardon me. Why can't we buy all 12 buses up front so that we can get the fleet up to full strength immediately?
Yeah, so we're, part of the budget this year is 2.6 million to do the first purchase. That's what we have available this year, and then we're going to budget an additional amount for the following year in our plan to get the remaining buses up to code. So we don't have enough. We've accumulated enough, plus the amount in 20 to be able to purchase that first component. But the way we've kind of built the budget in the long term is to make sure that we can, on a going basis, to be able to purchase, you know, once we get up to 12, probably 3 or so per year to be able to consistently keep the buses up to speed. So we don't have enough to do all 12 up front.
Okay. I've got about 15 more questions on this. I'm going to go to Councilman
Actually,
Pinkett.
Mr. Chair, can I get for clarification?
Yep.
Because when you started, you were saying that we had a bunch of buses that were already at the end of their useful lifespan. I thought you said there were 6?
They are nearing their useful life. So they're 6 years old with a useful life of 12 years.
Okay, all right. That was the part that threw me, because 6 years, I would not think that 6 years is near the end of the useful life of 12 years. But if that was intended to be the way you wanted to portray it, then I guess, Mr. Chair, I don't have any more confusion over that. Okay.
Thank you. Councilman Pinkett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my first question is related to service number 691, public rights of way landscape management. And so it says that this service covers 870 median strips. Is this all of our medians, and is all of this work done with DOT staff, or is any of it contracted out?
We'll bring up Kenny Ching, our Operations
Okay.
Bureau Chief.
Good evening, Kenneth Ching, Operations Bureau Chief, and in regards to your question, the maintenance of the medians and right-of-ways, the majority of it is contracted out. I would say roughly around 90%, give or take, and the remainder is also done by internal forces.
And so who monitors or manages the quality of work that the contractors perform on our medians?
Our superintendent of landscaping and the supervisors that report directly underneath of that superintendent.
And who are those two individuals?
I'm sorry?
Who are they?
Superintendent is Cynthia Weisel.
Uh-huh.
There's 3 supervisors.
So what would be the process? Like, if a contractor, let's take for example, performed work on North Avenue, the median on North Avenue, and they cut and clean, because I'm assuming that cleaning is a part of.
Cleaning is a part of preparation before cutting by the contractor.
So do they have to provide any visual evidence or support that they did what they were supposed to do, or does the supervisor drive by to see if they've done what they're supposed to do? How do they get paid, or how do we know that they performed what they were supposed to do?
Well, there is a schedule. The schedule is based on cutting of every 14 days, 16 cuts per season, and according to the schedule, our superintendent is aware of this schedule. They know exactly where the crew is going to be on a particular day, according to the contract. Therefore, when they are out in the field doing other related work, checking on their internal personnel, they do go by and check on the contractor as well.
Yeah, whoever is supposed to be monitoring North Avenue, I'm not saying that the contractors don't cut, but they definitely don't clean. And the only time that I ever see any cleaning is if I happen to be on North Avenue and I get out of my car and I tell them, you need to clean this up. Other than that, it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen when I call DOT or send an email to DOT letting them know that it's not being cleaned. And so I don't know who these supervisors are, but they're not monitoring the contractor, at least as it relates to North Avenue. I can't speak to any of the other parts of the city, but it's not happening on North Avenue.
I have a similar issue, sir.
So
But I do get a response when I request it, but if it's not proactive.
No, it's definitely not proactive. And the intersections are the worst, where it just piles up. It's like a big garbage can at most of the intersections on these medians. It's got to be better. We can't. Why should we as council persons, and we do it because we've accepted that responsibility for our districts, but whether these contractors are cutting, edging, and cleaning these medians should not be our responsibility. I shouldn't have to police. If so, this supervisor needs to send me, whoever it is, send me your check. And then I'll go out there and do it all the time, because right now it's not happening. We've been joined by Councilman Bullock. So what should we do?
Well, number one, if there is an issue, and if it's in relation to prior to the contractor getting out there to cut that particular segment or right-of-way, and services is not being performed properly, we will notify the contractor. He will definitely get out there that very next day and correct the problem. And when I say get out there and correct the problem, I make them supply me with photographs of how it looks after they left. If it's a particular area that is not done by a contractor and it's our internal crews, I then make them go out there on that same day, not the next day if time allows, and make them correct the problem. There is that constant issue of where we have panhandlers and people out on the corner that actually stage themselves at the corners or ends of medians, as I'm sure you are well aware of, and this is where you see the plastic bottles and stuff build up there, and they're left there.
Right.
Yeah. So
No, I understand that.
I understand. And then the other issue is that there is some segments of right-of-ways that are under the responsibility of the community to help and clean up under a MOU with the agency. I believe you may be reflecting on West North Avenue around Utah.
That's not the community part. The community part is probably down near Park, between Park and Mount Roy.
That's within that same segment. It's actually from 83 over to Utah.
The guys that are
Actually, the only reason why I'm saying, Councilman, beg your pardon, is the last time I sent my contractor in there to clean and cut that area where the timbers are having like a bordered planting area, we were approached by the community association to stop.
I'm not going to belabor the point. Maybe we just need to schedule.
Sure, and that's not a problem.
Just schedule because
I'll have it taken care of.
Okay.
It will not be a problem.
The second question I had was related to traffic calming. Is there a process, or is there a mechanism within DOT? Thanks, Kenny.
Sure.
Is there a mechanism within DOT that where you all evaluate maybe accident data and then are proactive in making recommendations related to certain traffic calming measures? And I'm gonna be specific why I'm asking, because what I've typically seen is that either through my office or through the community, we make recommendations on traffic calming. But there's certain areas, for example, Monroe at Windsor, where there's accidents all the time. We've got cars running into a daycare center, and it's not just once. It's every so, and I haven't seen an appropriate response to dealing with that issue over and over and over. And so I'm wondering, forget me asking, at some point DOT should be saying this isn't acceptable and we're going to figure out a way to calm this traffic.
Good evening, Council. Damien Taylor, DOT Traffic. We do traffic studies, which request traffic accident data and also speed data. And from that, we do try to come up with a traffic calming solution, also with myself and Mr. Turner and his division, to try to come up with some type of mechanism, if possible, to try to lessen the accident rate.
Once again, I'm not trying to make this, parochial to my specific issues, but whatever we're trying to do on that particular stretch at Monroe and Windsor is not working. And I know the community's made recommendations, and we also always been told why that won't work. But what we're not seeing is what will work. And so, you know, God forbid God forbid we have an accident that injures just more than property damage, and that somebody gets hurt at that intersection, because it is a pedestrian heavy intersection, especially when churches and the school are in session.
And we will take another look at that.
Okay.
And I'll get with you and give you an update.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Vice Chair, if I may add to that, we at DOT are really trying to stay away from that reactive approach to really looking at traffic issues, traffic management as a case-by-case basis. We are, as you probably know, embarking upon the realization of a comprehensive master plan, a comprehensive transportation plan that will address issues such as the recurring need for traffic studies in the different neighborhoods. Along with that, Mr. Vice Chair, we are also revamping our SOPs. So the standard operating procedures at DOT that really call for traffic studies and then evaluation and then us providing solutions is something that has reached literally its a useful life, because the process that used to be a 311 process where you had issues that dealt with either traffic calming or traffic issues like accidents, you would come to us via 311. We will send investigators there, and then we'll try to find issues. We have realized that this, in fact, is at its best because of capacity issues within the department. It's really not the answer. So we are reversing that, starting with, again, a 30,000 feet level approach with the comprehensive plan, but also with us revamping the traffic management SOPs, so that, in fact, when any resident calls us, the procedure is the same. We're not favoring one neighborhood versus another. We're not doing things as a reaction.
Yeah, I would agree with that approach. I think that, unfortunately, some of the responses to those community pedestrian traffic concerns, the response is just too slow. As a council person, and I know I'm not alone, some of these issues we've inherited, which means that they've been this way for years prior to, even before some of you came into your positions. And which means that by the time we got them, they were beyond, they should have already been addressed, which means that we have to have even a greater sense of urgency to address these issues. And I'm not saying to do stuff that's not planned and not thoughtful. I'm just saying that there's got to be a sense of urgency, because we're just fortunate that people haven't gotten hurt in some of these situations, but we can't rely on that. Councilwoman Sneed.
Thank you. Can someone tell me how many vacant positions you have in the agency?
Bring up NGR, HR chief.
Good evening. My name is Njukeng Asong, and I'm the chief of HR. Right now, I have approximately 200 vacant positions or so.
Can you give me an exact number? I don't know what the "and so" means. So, how many vacant positions do we have?
Prior to the attack, we had about 233, I would imagine, but we're on a very fast track for recruitment. So, I think that number has reduced significantly.
How many vacant positions have we had for more than 2 years?
I am 3 months old in my role, so I don't have that data for you right now. I can provide that data to you at a later time.
Can we make that a question, Chairman, to find out how many vacant positions we've had over the last 2 years?
Jeff, number of vacant positions at DOT, number of positions at DOT that have been vacant for longer than 2 years. What's that, 36? Thank you.
Can you provide us with a organizational chart as to what's going on in the organization now, since Michelle is no longer there?
Currently, we have our organizational chart, and I think we have a copy here. a
with,
sample copy.
with assistants, personal assistants, have all those people been reassigned?
I have to, to the best of my knowledge, I don't think there's been a whole lot of changes since the previous director. You want to take that, Frank? Sorry.
There is a position of, there was assistant to the director where we are recasting that position. We're now trying to find the best way to have the effective use of the young man.
So can we have the organizational chart with names and positions and with everybody that's a part of this executive staff?
Yes, absolutely.
How many people on the executive staff are Baltimore City residents?
How many people are Baltimore City residents? Again, that's an information which I can provide to you at a later date.
Thank you.
So Jeff, 37 will be an org chart with names and titles. Councilwoman Sneed, is that something that, not trying to divert from your question, but is that something that, doesn't DHR have that? I'm just wondering about the second part. Do we want DOT to give that to us, or is that something?
We can ask, but I'm not sure if they're since Michelle is no longer there exactly, if anybody knows.
Yeah, and I know Michelle had residents in the city, but I'm wondering if that's, because I recall your last hearing that you had in the Labor Committee, DHR might have that info handy. So I don't know if you want to ask for, did you ask for an update on that from DHR this morning?
No.
And I can add that I know we have provided the information to
Hang on.
DHR.
Or we're going to cut DOT out of this one, or save you some trouble. Councilwoman, does it make sense we just ask Jeff now for that?
Sure. You want to get it from HR for me?
Yeah, so we get an update on the list of all those employees that are required by the law to be city residents. Let's just get an update on that list.
Well, I'm just looking for the executive team. I'm not looking for everyone.
Never mind. I apologize.
Just the executive team.
And I'm sorry, how would you define executive team?
There are people that directly report to Michelle when she was here. And so I'm looking for the people that are at 417 that are in that office who report directly to the director, or who did. I'm just curious what's going on over there.
Currently, as well as the ones who formerly did.
Mm-hmm. Yes, please. My other question is in reference to the lighting issue. And so I wasn't aware until it happened to us, but I'm posing a question because the last year, the former director stated that she was going to challenge herself to get an inventory of all the street lighting in order to be able to develop a proactive street light repair program. Can someone tell me the status of that? Lighting is so important in Baltimore City with some of the challenges that we have, and so it kind of deters from crime if our neighborhoods have lighting.
I'm Amma Bende, Chief Project Officer. Could you repeat the question? I'm not sure I understand really the gist of it.
At last year's budget hearing, the transportation director stated that she was going to challenge herself to get an inventory of all the street lighting in order to be able to develop a proactive street light repair program. She also brought each council member in for an update to brief us on this lighting program. I want to know what the status is.
Okay, so Councilwoman, are you referring maybe to the Be More Bright, what we call internally of the Be More Bright program?
It could be. You
okay,
would know
thank
better
you.
than.
All right, so I'll have currently Kenny Cheng, our bureau operation. Currently, Kenny Cheng, our bureau operation chief, is in charge of the program. So I'll have Kenny come here so that we can give you a brief status update on where we are.
Currently, the Be More Bright program is in phase 1. It's still moving forward. And let me see, last week we were a little bit over about 85%, and I believe about another 15% to go to complete phase 1. We're currently working with finance in order to identify the funding for phase 2, B, which is a total of like about 4,200 plus lights to go on that section. And also we had a as part of that meeting, we talked with finance in regards to not just identifying how much funds that could be allocated through energy savings to cover this particular segment of the project, but also looking at whether or not as if the city wants to move forward with the new installation phases, phase 1 and 2, and if we're going to continue on with phase 3 with converting the remainder of the lights within the city. It was discussed and identified that the new installation phases would be all brand new costs, meaning not just to the agency but to the city as well, as far as buying the material, the resources, the installation, that kind of process.
So in phase 1, what areas got the lights?
In phase 1, what areas got lost?
Lights. What areas got them? I mean, I didn't get any new lights. Did you get any? Okay.
As far as the actual neighborhoods, I do not know off the top of my head as far as that breakdown. The project initiated starting out with beginning within the VRI zones, which was considered as priority 1.
Can we add that to the list, Jeff, to find out what areas got lights, where are these new lights at? Can we find, you said for the next phase we're working on funding, so how much?
Phase 2?
Or the next phase, you said you're working on funding.
Yeah, we're working with finance to see whether or not how much actually can be funded in regards to phase 2. Daniel from finance actually determined that it's what, 5.2 million, I believe it is, for 2B.
No, I think it's closer to $8 million.
Right.
We did the analysis. So for conversions from the 2 LED lights, there are savings both on the energy and on the maintenance.
Right.
We are using that savings to pay for all of the equipment and materials. Whatever is left after that, those replacements are done, can be utilized for brand new installations. And I believe DOT is currently doing the study to figure out where there are gaps in the lighting in the city. Correct. So we are setting them the number, the cap of how many lights can be added to the city's inventory. I think it's that.
That's it.
I'm sure I asked more than 2 questions, so I'll let my colleagues ask some questions.
Council President Scott has a quick follow-up, and then we're going to Middleton.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chang, for all your great work. You're one of the most accessible people in city government, so we greatly appreciate everything that you do. Talking about, just following up on this, the Be More Bright program, and I had this discussion with the director and some other folks in DOT before she left. How are we inspecting that the lights were actually put where they say they were? For example, during my meeting with the former director, there was a map, including in my neighborhood, that said that these lights had been replaced with LEDs, and I said, I can guarantee you that they aren't, because I look at them every night and they're still the same ones. Did we have someone going back and doing inspections to make sure that they were there? And who did that, and how was that assessed, and are we going to continuously be doing that? Or if there's some mechanism for the citizens as we're going through and changing them to do that?
First of all, the identification of the exact lights comes from the BGE GIS data, which is provided to us. In doing that, the areas, VRI zones, are broken down by grids, and within those grids, BGE provides a grid map outlining exactly each and every light pole. When the ESCOs / contractors go out and perform the work, they have a supervisor on site, they have a project manager on site to ensure that QA and QC work is actually being done. Also noting if there's any kind of issues about when they do the actual conversion, say, for example, a light fixture has been on a pole for 20 years, rusted, can't get the bolts out or something like that, and they have to saw it off and reestablish a new one like that. And therefore, that's how that's done. Also, myself, along with Brent Hooper and the other project manager, Carrie Blake, we do random inspections unannounced It could be from a zone or area where they say they already have been, or where they may currently be working.
Thank you. And just to be clear, because there are some portions of the city that have been getting the changes to LED that are not in VRI. They're in a different phase, right?
The scope of the project was to work the VRI zone first and then move to the outer perimeters of within that entire zone. So therefore, you would have one complete zone instead of leaving segments of it untouched.
Okay, thank you. We'll follow up with you guys about it. Thank you.
Sure.
Middleton?
Thank you. I guess first is a statement, and just to all of you, thank you for what you continue to try to do in the Department of Transportation for our city. I guess as you listen to many of the council members, we just, I guess, try to remind you how important the Department of Transportation is within our city as we try to eradicate and improve our crime, just the troubles that we have in the city. And transportation plays an extremely big role in that. And safety is, I know, at the top of your list because it involves every aspect, along with trying to improve our infrastructure. So all that to say, I know, and then I guess one thing we keep going over is the timing and the slow progression. You do eventually get to completing some major tasks, but I guess because of the process that you follow, it just takes a long time to complete a task. And I think we need to understand that more. So a couple of things. I noticed at Western Poly High School, citywide school on Falls Road, you're, of course, a year and a half, 2 years ago, there was a student that was basically hit. So we now finally see a new type of median strip, I guess, to help students cross that street, kind of where the CVS is on Falls Road. And I frequent that area a lot and noticed already that there's really some improved slowing, and hopefully that new idea. I don't know if you want to kind of explain that new kind of medium strip. I mean, it's really something completely different. I guess it's giving a chance for students where Western High School is. I guess the students are going to stop right there and then cross the other. I'm just trying to figure out that new design, and it is a new kind of design.
It may be new, but I
it?
believe that might be underneath of traffic calming or grant.
It's a new kind of traffic calming.
Yeah.
Grammy's had a baby, our engineer designed that. Can I use your microphone? I keep forgetting.
Can you explain
Charles.
that? And are there going to be more like that design around the city?
Again, I'm Charles Penny, Chief for Transit and Sustainable Transportation. That design was actually done by Graham Young, who was our complete streets guy and engineer. He just had his baby, so he's not here today to speak to actually why he decided to go with that type of treatment option versus other treatment options. Perhaps new to the city, and we can get a more detailed explanation to you. And obviously, any treatment options that are good, we will use those throughout the city where applicable, where we find similar situations. So we're always trying to innovate from that perspective.
Okay, thank you. And the last question, does DOT, you have a collaboration with forestry? Do you have a collaboration with forestry in any kind of way? And I say that because of the rains that we have been getting. I have been getting a lot of calls in areas where a lot of stop signs have been covered with limbs and trees, and accidents have been caused. Is there some kind of plan that, when people put in the 311 calls, they don't seem to be handled, but so they call my office. So Is there a plan in place to look at all the stop signs where in areas that are kind of suburbia Baltimore City, Forest Park, you know, we have a whole the outskirts of downtown, a lot of trees, and stop signs are being blocked. We definitely need, I don't know if forestry plays a role in that.
Well, they do. That's something that we need to pay more attention to. We're actually, and this is something my staff doesn't yet know, we're about to start a program of more proactive inspections for traffic signs. This is for a couple of reasons. One of them is basically to catch more faded signs and replace them without having to wait for citizens to call them in. The other is for what you mentioned, particularly in this time of year when we do get growth that covers them. Forestry, we do work with forestry and get them to trim, but of course we have to be aware of it first to let them know. So what we're going to do is, like I say, we're going to have more proactive inspections to look for a number of things. And this won't just be on main routes where we already do routine inspections on the radial gateways, but this is going to be more into the neighborhoods and places where we have stop signs, we have faded, no stopping, the truck signs, whatever it is. And we'll be looking for that as well. So your point's well taken. It is something that needs to happen during the growing season. And we are going to be stepping up our inspections. And we do have collaboration with forestry in a couple of ways. For example, our footways people work with them a lot when they replace sidewalks around tree pits and that sort of thing. So we do interact with them a lot of ways. And one of the ways is to try to get them to trim trees for us once we've identified the need.
So, Mr.
Your point's well taken.
Mr. President, I don't know because I know forestry has a shortage problem in employees. So I don't know if that maybe could be part of the problem too, why we're not getting these stop signs, if they are holding up the collaboration piece and helping you to get tasks done. Because at the end
We'll
of the
reach out
day-
and work with them because your point's well taken. That may be something, if we do our inspections and get a whole lot of needs that could burden them. So we'll sit down with them and meet and see how do we make this work.
Because at the end of the day,
That's
the
a good
blame gets
idea.
put on you.
Right. And we do need
because
to
of
own it.
the actual stop sign.
Exactly. One of the things we sometimes do is when we find an intersection that has that problem happen persistently, often we'll put up a second stop on the left side or the back-to-back stops so that if it does get covered, there's secondary coverage. But this is all part of what we need to be doing in our proactive inspections, which we haven't yet started, but the mayor had asked me to do that, so we're gearing up for that.
And I kind of bring that up because it does affect cyclists and pedestrians and so on.
Safety,
It's all
generally.
kind of connected, so
Exactly.
I just kind of wanted you to be aware of that.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll make sure that's part of our inspection plan.
Mr. Chair, do we have forestry coming in at any point?
Yes, ma'am. We have green infrastructure on Thursday from 11 to 11:30. My assumption is we'll be spending most of that time talking about forestry and mowing grass. And then we have rec and parks from 11:30 to 1:30. Keep in mind, we've already done the youth services portion of rec and parks portfolio.
Okay. I don't, Mr. Frank, I don't know if you would like to have a transportation representative sit in on some of when they come up, just to see what they say about certain things that you collaborate with.
Yeah, and I'll be reaching out to Eric too, just to kind of have a sit down so we can make sure to come up with something that doesn't overburden them, but works us all. And we haven't really done that specifically yet, so I'm not blaming them at all.
Definitely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Colleagues, this is a quick call. I know at least two of us, Councilman Pinkett and Stokes, have already provided questions. But as a reminder, we have fire department again on Thursday at 3:30 p.m. One of the things that we asked for earlier is if you have questions that you want verbally answered at that hearing, we're asking that you get those questions to Michael Huber. So Michael's sitting in the back right now. If you don't have a laptop or a phone and don't want to type those up, if you could please go see Michael during this hearing, because Michael's plan is in the next hour to get those questions out to the fire department. So that applies to every single one of us up here with the exception of Councilman Pinkett. So if you haven't given him those questions, please do. Councilman Henry, followed by Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay. So I'm actually going to start with one that just got texted to me. The Lake Walker Community Association is meeting right now, and when Nia in my office told them that I wasn't there because I was here, they said, "Hey, how come the 1,000 block of Lake Avenue got repaved in the the Orange Cone kickoff press conference event like a month ago? How come that block got paved but not any of the other blocks before or after it?" And so my question for them is there a short, like a succinct explanation of how DOT chooses one block of a street over another for resurfacing? Or if there is no easy explanation for it, who is willing to go to Lake Walker's next meeting and explain it in a more complex fashion?
I think you may have just motivated us to make sure we come up with an answer. Kenny will address that.
In regards to your question, Councilman, the identifications of the streets that are chosen for Operation Orange Cone, as you know, it's two parts. It's internal and then it's external. Internal is where it's our internal forces that do the actual surface mill and pavement of 2 inches of asphalt, and versus where it's the external that does the total reconstruction. It could be
I know that part.
So you know
Like,
how that is.
how do you guys make the decision that on this 4-block stretch of street, all of which is bumpy, we're going to do these 2 blocks and not these 2 blocks or these 2 blocks?
Well, in a perfect world, we would like to try to do it from end to end.
Right.
But considering the volume of work that we try to achieve in a season, 8 months, we look at those particular segments, particular blocks, where we've either received the most complaints, all right, or the pavement condition index tells us that it could last longer if we just do the simple mill and pave instead of total reconstruction.
That's succinct. Okay, complaints and conditions. Okay, all right, I can do that. The second question is not as much a question. I don't think this is you, but you can tell me. I'm actually hitting this one over something in my district because I gave it to the former director at last year's budget hearings, and I was assured it would be taken care of because it was already being examined, and yet we're here. And that is Gay and Fayette, where when we did when we working in collaboration with the MTA created these only lanes for buses, we moved the parking from the, what would that be, the east side of Gay to the west side along the plaza, which is cool, I get that. But when it was on the east side, there were rush hour parking restrictions for it. And when it got moved over to the west side along the plaza, we created a permanent parking lane and eliminated a potential driving lane. So now there's this huge bottleneck on Gay Street going north where suddenly that only lane picks up on one side and there's this parking, there are these no parking restrictions on the other, and everything gets squeezed down to 2 lanes of traffic. And it's not just that I'm complaining as somebody who periodically leaves trying to go through that intersection. I've sat in Jason Hessler's office in the Benton building during meetings and watched that box blocked for cycle after cycle after cycle during rush hour every single day. That is a hugely dysfunctional intersection, and it's literally right under our noses. So I don't know how we have any kind of credibility talking to people about, how we're trying to deal with this when literally the intersection right here at in the center of government doesn't work?
Councilman, my office looks out on that intersection as well. In fact, just tonight, I was out on my balcony looking at the progression and seeing how they need to be changed. And as Raj will tell you, I just the other day told him some things that I think we need to do to make Gay Street work better. In answer to your question about the parking, what happened was when the bus lane went in order to have enough width to get around the corner at the intersection between, or the turn between Lexington and Saratoga, one of the lanes was reduced. So it doesn't feed. So we used to have 4 lanes kind of tight going around that curve. Now we have 2 plus a bus lane. So we actually lost 50% of our traffic capacity in that curve. And the thing is, adding the peak back on that east side, or even on the west side, would give us an extra lane that now doesn't go anywhere because we have 1 less lane because of that extra widening of the curve. But there are other problems that we can fix. What I saw is Gay Street has a nice long green band, but during part of the green band, when it's green at Fayette and Lexington, it turns red at Saratoga. So when it turns red at Saratoga, the traffic stops and starts to back up. Then when it starts to back up, the Lexington Street turns red, and it continues to back up to Fayette. So when you're on Fayette trying to make that left, and you want to get in the left lane to get to 83, there's a car right there.
Right.
What we need to do is to empty out that lane so there's a place for a couple of cars to turn. I invite you to come walk on my balcony. You get to see this really well. So I told Raj, what was it, the day before yesterday? Recently, to say 2 things that I wanted him to do. 1, shrink the amount of red time on Gay at Lexington so that doesn't start queuing back as quickly. The other thing is that right now, all the time that Gay Street is red at Saratoga is on the Gay Street progression. So I think if we split that so that part of that delay goes to the Gay traffic and part of it goes to the Lexington traffic, that too should help that queue not back up as far to Fayette Street, which ought to provide some room for the turn. So I guess the short answer is, that's still a work in progress. We do understand it. I do see it literally right out of my office, and I know you're right about needing it to have some more attention. So I'm optimistic that in the next week or 2, it'll get better.
Okay, I appreciate what you're saying, Frank, and I want to say okay.
No, wait and see, because I wouldn't want you to do that unless it really is better.
I want to say this. I'm gonna try to say this totally seriously. That's not far off of what I was told a year ago.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I can't speak for my
I know.
director,
I get that. That's why.
I'm sorry, I wasn't part of that conversation.
I know, but I want to be clear. I'm not yelling because you're not the person who told me we can take care of that pretty quickly a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
But the person in your job told me that a year ago.
And in the office I'm now in where I can really see it. So I know you're right.
So here's what I would like to ask, and Mr. Chair, if this could go into requests. This is one where I would like this issue revisited before the end of the fiscal year. Is that a fair deadline? By like the end of this month?
By then. Yes.
I would like to see some change that has improved the conditions of that intersection.
I would too.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Chair, do we have to frame that specifically?
10 words or less, Councilman.
Okay, Raj, we're under pressure.
And I think I agree with my colleagues. Whether it's officially wide enough to be a completely legal traffic lane, it is completely intuitive to say that putting rush hour restrictions on those parking spots would alleviate some of the pressure in that block. So can we, by the end of this month, add rush hour parking restrictions on that stretch?
I'll make you a counter proposal. Let's you and I meet on that corner and talk about it there, because then I think we can both see. I think you'll see what I'm talking about.
Let me make a counter proposal. Put the restrictions on and leave them there for 3 months, and if it does not help, then fine, you can put them back.
No, I think we need to look first, because we could be creating a worse safety problem. The reason I'm saying that is if we restrict the left side, we'll then have 2 lanes that feed into 1. That's not a safe condition. We have to do something else if we're going to do that. That's what I want to meet you out there so we can figure out a plan.
Besides, I don't want to be rude or anything, as this intersection is in the 11th district. Which specific intersection are you referring?
Yeah, that's why I came to you last year to tell you that I was going to talk to
Fayette and Holiday?
Gay.
Gay.
Literally
Gay.
this one right here.
Because Frank, we discussed, Councilman, if I can jump in.
I'm sorry, go on.
We discussed Fayette and Holiday, and that there are constantly vehicles blocking the box, making it unsafe for folks walking to and from City Hall, not just City Hall employees. I mean, there's something wrong with the timing of that light, because vehicles that are traveling westbound on Fayette Street are constantly in the middle of the intersection because of the timing of the next light at Fayette and Guilford heading westbound.
Do you see that mainly in the morning or the evening? I just want to make sure my people get out there at the right time to see the worst of it. Or is it any time?
Predominantly in the afternoon.
Okay, thank you.
But can we address that as part of Councilman Henry's 11th district request?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we've been looking at Fayette. It's funny because my signal tech went out and called me because she said, hey, I've got things running really well coming in past the post office to President Street.
Right.
I said, well, that's great, but the problem I need you to look at is further in. So I'm hoping he's done that by now. I'll check with him.
Okay, thank you. Councilman, please.
Okay, so you need the 10 words or?
Yeah.
Okay,
Brief.
so what we need is by the end of the month of June, we need a substantial and visible and tangible improvement to the intersection of Gay and Fayette during evening rush. I don't know that this is a problem during morning rush. I will, but I know it's a problem during evening rush.
Yeah, it's mainly an evening problem from what I've seen.
So can we want that in writing?
Yes.
Okay, written plan for improvements to Gay and Fayette, along with Holiday and Fayette.
Actually, let me make a suggestion that might even be better. What I want to do is take some video before and after, because I think that even speaks more than a plan. I want to actually get the plan in place and working to see if it works. We'll probably have to tweak it, but I don't want to say, here's what we're going to do. I'd rather say, here's what we did. So,
but let's
thank you
get
for that.
something in writing, just to
Okay, we'll get you that in the next couple of days, and then we'll get it in place by the end of the month.
Councilman Henry, is that good? A commitment in writing?
That's good.
And we'll have changes done in the field by the end of the month.
Okay, can I go to my second question?
Please.
Okay, so the 2017 separated bike lane network plan, and this is in honor of Councilman Dorsey, who couldn't be here tonight, but I know would love to have been. That plan calls for 17 new miles of bike infrastructure a year. The target on page 554 is listed as 10 miles, which is not consistent with the plan. But more importantly, I was having trouble finding out where the money for any of it is. Where is the money for new bike infrastructure?
Councilman, thanks for bringing up another bike issue here in Baltimore. I think I just can't have enough of them wherever I go.
We live but to serve.
Absolutely. So very quickly, I'm going to give you a sense of where we are with the 2017 downtown bike network, separated bike network plan. And I'm going to give you a sense of where we are right now with the target 2017. The reality being that, 2019. The reality being that between the target of 2019 and what we've realized since 2017, the numbers clearly don't match, and I'm going to try to give you an explanation here. So number one, after the plan, the separated bike network plan was adopted in 2017, the major issue that we faced was the fact that the funding for it was all based on grants.
Right.
It's a real issue, and I'm getting back to this, but 10 years ago, I was part of making those calls for getting more grants to fund alternative modes of transportation. It's really not working. It hasn't worked, and part of what happened between 2017 and 2018, where we only got almost 6 lane miles constructed, was the fact that, number one, we faced a year with a lot of rain that really altered just construction in general within our right-of-ways. It wasn't necessarily something we hoped for. So that was one issue that we had to deal with. The second issue was the fact that we, and I'm taking the blame for it, and I wasn't here, but we really did not do the proper public involvement / public outreach process. So what that led into was a series of some of those projects that really did not get full approval for the residents that we were trying to serve. Okay. So we got a little bit of setback and pushback just due to the fact that we didn't quite do our homework. So we're trying to reverse that. And you add to that the fact that capacity-wise, and I know it's an issue that might have been brought up before, but as big as DOT is, the planning shop is a small world. It's a small shop. We were facing capacity in terms of who would do the concept design in-house, who would then go and work with the construction crew to really implement the project. So we are dealing with that issue as well internally, but it was one of the elements that resulted in us building less infrastructure. So if you add those three elements, the lack of public outreach, at least the lack of the right way to conduct public outreach, you add to that the fact that the grants at some point ran their own life, and then at the state and federal levels, we just couldn't get reimbursed for what we did not spend. And the fact that, of course, we had a very rainy season. Those elements really amounted to us really taking a little bit of a hit. Yes.
Okay.
Now, in terms of moving forward, we're doing two things. One is in our CIP for 2020. We've requested about $500,000 to specifically address the bike program management issue, and that really covers 4 areas that we know we are lacking. So we're asking $500,000 to hire a consultant to help us with grant management, to help us with construction management when projects move from concept to design to planning to design and implementation. We've seen the hiccups, and to also help us to educate the people that we are supposed to be serving. There is clearly a sense of disconnect between us trying to do the right thing in providing alternative modes of transportation in and out of the city, and folks who believe that at times either we didn't speak to them properly, or we just ignored the fact that they didn't believe that bikes were actually the answer. So we're doing that, and the second thing that we're doing is that because of the accumulation of fundings that we've had in the past, literally 11 years, maybe 10, we've had identified pots of monies in our own coffins that would be allocated to FY19. We've identified projects that we included in our current construction seasons, and those will be, if we do it right, those would amount for about 10 lane miles within this construction season. The only hiccup here is that the construction season will stretch a little bit out of the FY19.
Okay.
And the last piece is, of course, we are in the process of hiring a bike planner. It's going to make my life a little bit easier, too.
Okay. So, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Councilman?
I have one more question. Would you like me to hold it until after other colleagues have asked?
Is it going to, yes, please.
Okay, all right.
Councilman Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I also have a lot of questions, but I'll try and get through them. I did solicit some ideas and questions from our colleague who's missing from the room, who we all know who I might be referring to. You might be watching right now, so let me jump right in. Well, actually, I'll start with some of the stuff I was mostly concerned about. You hit the bike lanes piece. I've gotten concerns about the conditions of sidewalks and ramps being ADA compliant. especially from constituents that have children and families that are living with disabilities. Where are we with, I see there's progress being made every time there's road resurfacing. I do see compliance occurring. Where are we in the greater scheme of reaching that goal of full compliance with ADA requirements for sidewalks throughout the city? I'm sorry to make you get up.
Here,
you can stay right there.
There we go.
Again, I'm Ama Bende. Right now, we have 2 tasks on the way under our asset management program that we're establishing, and I lead that program. And the goal really is for us to have an ADA self-evaluation or compliance report completed, I would say, by the fall of this year.
This year?
Yeah, by the fall of this year. And that compliance report will help us with the ADA transition report that we need to provide to the DOJ. All right. And the other task is our asset inventory. So right now, we are building the GIS asset inventory for all of the key assets within the department. Again, the goal is to have that completed by the fall end of this year. So once that's completed, we'll have a good sense of our sidewalks. But again, this is just the first step. We'll have to, next year, our goal will be to do the condition assessment of those sidewalks. So at the end of this year, we'll have the inventory of our sidewalks. Next year, we'll do the condition assessment for the sidewalks.
For all city sidewalks?
That's the goal.
In 1 year?
We'll try to, again,
Okay.
we'll try. Again, we'll try to prioritize. When I say, again,
Okay. I was like, that's
it's
ambitious.
always about a prioritization plan. Thank you, Councilman. Yeah, it's always about a prioritization plan, but at least the goal is to have a plan in place.
Okay.
But before you can have a plan in place, you have to have your inventory, and that's why and that's how we get done by the end of the year.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem.
All right, rapid fire here. Sort of building off of my colleague Councilwoman Sneed's line of questioning around lighting. I know this is done in VRI zones, but does the department engage in other proactive lighting assessments in areas that have experienced increases in violence, or is a violence reduction strategy beyond the VRI zones?
Let me start with that, and then Kenny's more the expert. He'll pick it up. I can tell you that, of course, the LED replacement project is citywide, and that it does involve brightening lights citywide. Also, we have a program where there's a complaint-driven program where if somebody says the lighting is not up to snuff, we'll go out at night and actually do an illumination study. But let me let Kenny. Anything else you want to add, Kenny?
As far as areas that, I'm sorry, repeat your concern.
So the director sort of touched on it. I know I'm well aware of the Be More Bright program and the progress being made. I've seen the maps, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you.
Is beyond just replacing the lights, do crews do an assessment? So, for example, let me give a better example. There's a block off of Frederick Avenue that I was working with constituents on, because it wasn't so much that the lights needed to be replaced as much as there needed to be trees cut back, like just sort of an environmental work around the lighting to improve the lighting of the block itself. They had new lights, but there were still some issues with, you know, the visibility of those lights, and that was complaint driven. What I'm asking is, as you're rolling out, or as your crews are going out to look at or replace the LEDs, or for other issues associated beyond the VRI walks, is this something that's viewed as a public safety tool, is really what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah, as far as that's concerned, and the aspect of the Be More Bright part, when the lights are being converted, or even if they run across areas en route to the next, say, segment of work to be converted, if there's, for instance, tree foliage, blocking the light to, stop it from illuminating as it should, they're actually creating lists and providing it to us. We are then taking that list and forwarding that over to Forestry Division so that they can prune or cut back those particular branches to help improve the lighting aspect overall.
Okay, that's good to know. And just really quickly, what's the best way for constituents to request a lighting assessment?
Go through 311,
Okay.
ask for the request for TRM dash street lighting inadequate / too bright.
Ah, okay, inadequate.
Very specific.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. For all those watching, that was very specific. All right, so one of the other topics that's come up a lot is the department's capacity to take on new projects. And we've heard in the past that engineers and planners are in short supply at the department. How many of those positions currently exist, and how many need to be created for the department to be fully staffed in their ability to take on more large-scale projects?
That would be Mr. NJ Assam.
So in terms of our recruitment strategies, the individual chiefs make a plan based on the operational needs and send over to HR for us to proceed with hiring. And we have developed a more proactive approach to that. And first of all, with our monthly meetings with the individual chiefs to look at what we have as vacancies and to ask them what their operational needs would be so that we can plan ahead of that. So that's what we do right now. We have developed a very proactive approach to our recruitment process, starting with our open house last, I think 2 months ago, that we, brought together city residents across, different spectrum to come together for our positions. We had about 300 attendees, over 100 interviews, and right now, from the open house, we've hired almost 45, filled almost 45 vacancies at the moment within the space of 2 months, and on track to go above 60 or so. So in terms of the exact number of maybe positions that they're hiring for, and what they're expecting, those are conversations that are ongoing every day.
Okay, so you don't have an exact number yet, but you are working with DHR.
Correct.
When do you think you'll have a number that could be shared with the committee?
I can provide that information to you this week, maybe tomorrow.
Okay, so can we add that to the list, Mr. Chair?
Yep. Can you restate it, please?
The current number of engineer and/or planner vacancies, and a timeline for filling those vacancies. Is that what you think you could have?
Correct.
Okay.
Jeff, what are we at? 40?
41.
Thank you.
Okay. And then the last question are related to traffic enforcement officers. Or would that be you as well? The best to answer that?
It depends on the question.
Okay. All right. We'll stay there then. All right. What are the barriers to hiring traffic enforcement officers and CDL drivers? How can the barriers be eliminated to make it easier to hire them? And what are they doing during daytime hours? So sort of one is around like filling positions, and then also more of a staffing assessment during day hours. What does a typical day look like for a traffic enforcement officer?
I can speak to, I'm sorry, Toby Goodwin, Safety Division Chief. I can speak to the traffic enforcement officers. Some of our impediments have been getting individuals through the background process, the vetting process. We struggle with some getting through the police commissioner's certification, and then once we get them through that, I'm being honest with you, I kind of hold my breath and hope they can get through the physical examination. That's the impediments that are preventing us from filling the vacancies that we have in that position. But right now, as I speak, we're trying to bring on some temporary employees. We have 10 in the pipeline right now from our April 13th job fair. We're waiting now to get them through the physical process so we can start to bring them on. And we'll be using them in a specialized design area within our parking deployment operation to help with the residential parking area.
Okay. And the same for CDL?
I can't speak to CDL.
Okay. Well, could you speak, while I got you here though, then regarding traffic enforcement during daytime hours, can you speak to where deployments are, or where your prioritization areas are during daytime hours for traffic enforcement?
So we start as early as 4 a.m. and we close out at 11 p.m. on a daily basis. On Saturdays and Sundays, we go from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. On a given day, Monday through Friday, our teams range from scofflaw, traffic enforcement, point control, and abandon. So I have various squads that come on at different times throughout the morning and the afternoon hours, and they're assigned to various aspects of the city. Most of my enforcement personnel do a combination of restricted parking, impound, 7 a.m., 9 a.m., 4 p.m., 6 p.m. They go from that aspect into street cleaning, which has expanded throughout the city of Baltimore, that has increased the ticket count in terms of revenue base. In addition to that, they answer 311 calls, which is a very high volume throughout the city of Baltimore in all aspects of the city. And then our evening shift just picks up where the morning shift takes off, and we try to cover the entire city. As you know, the evening shift is much lesser personnel than we have in the morning shift. So we're trying to hire these additional personnel so we can kind of work in the medium, so we can build out a stronger operational plan throughout the city of Baltimore.
Okay. And who could speak to CDL? Thank you.
Oh,
to CDL hiring for towing.
Yeah, Council, what's your question, please?
What are the barriers to hiring CDL drivers, and how can those barriers be eliminated to make hiring easier and filling those positions?
So just like the TEOs, one of the challenges we've had is really going through the physical, the drug and alcohol test and all of that. But also we've also realized that there's a challenge when it comes to the pay rates for city drivers. And I think that proposition has gone over to DHR. And DHR, I think last 2 weeks, announced a couple of studies that they want to do in terms of pay rates for certain classifications, which is one of them as well, right? But at the moment, right now, due to from our open house, we were able to fill all of our city driver positions at DOT. So we currently have maybe 1 or 2 vacancies that just came up, but we've been on track to fill those positions already.
Okay.
Thank you. Council President Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Director, DOT plans to spend about $83.8 million in contracted services in fiscal 2020. What services do you guys contract for?
You mean other than the circulator? The DK, can you? I'm going to have our chief fiscal officer come up.
Good evening, Chair, and good evening, everyone. I am DK, Chief of Physical in DOT. In contract, our major portion is ATBS camera program. Then towing, we pay to the towers. And right of way, we hire contractor. Then circulator. These are some of that I remember. I can provide the other list.
So thank you. Can you provide the council, and Mr. Amaros, you can start to type away right now. This is an official request. Can you provide the council with a detailed table of the department's contracts, as well as the services provided by each contract, along with the enterprise status of the contract, and if it is for a MBE or WBE business? And also, I say that to say this because my understanding is that we also contract out engineering work, we contract out a lot of different things, and for me, from where I sit, the city would be better spent in hiring more engineers, hiring more people to put in the positions that we can groom and grow up in the department to understand how the department operates, but also how the city is and understand the culture of Baltimore. So can someone tell me why we prefer, it seems, to contract even things about engineering for projects out instead of hiring folks like, let's say, Graham, more folks like Graham Young to do that kind of work?
Yeah, normally our division, they decide what internal folks they have which can handle those type of work. If they think they don't have internal capacity, then they look out for the consultant to hire. And most of our consultants, they work on the capital program.
And so let me ask that question in a different way. If I was a division chief and I came to the director or whoever is in charge and said, I no longer want to contract out these services, I want to hire someone full time, what would the response be?
I guess if I could, you mentioned Graham, and if I could have a dozen Grahams, I'd be very happy. He's an exceptional young engineer. I think the practicalities of a lot of the engineering contracting, it's partly expertise, but it's also partly to be able to scale up and scale back very easily. Let's say, for example, in a given year you have a $100 million capital program, and you have $10 million for the design contracts. The next year you drop down to $50 million capital project, and you need half as many engineers. You don't really want to have permanent people that you lay off, but if you have it's very easy to cut back on contract services. So it makes it very easy to ramp up and ramp down as you need. We clearly need a core of competent engineers within our agency to do some design work and review the consultants and review the work they do. And clearly we have to have that, and we have to keep them on staff. But the others, if you have to go up and down, which you often do with the way CIP varies, it's much easier to do that with consultant services. Having said that, if I could get a dozen Grahams, I'd be very happy.
So I was going to say, and ask Mr. Sinema to chime in, have we seen like a big up and down? Has it been significant? So do you think, from a fiscal standpoint, do you think the department has been fiscally responsible and prudent in going the contract way versus having more people in-house?
Yeah, I think the guidance we give agencies and what Frank described is if you have a consistent level of work that you know you can count on from year to year, it's often better to have a full-time city employee. But for that work that's either specialized knowledge that it's just very unique that you're not going to be able to find somebody to fill a city position, or if there's kind of that scaling up and down work, it's better to hire contractors. So that's the guidance we give to agencies, and I that's what we've seen generally in DOT. Okay,
so Jeff, to add on to that request, can we have a breakdown of that inside that contractual breakdown, a breakdown of how many of those are for professionalized services, and then also within those, how many the MBE breakdown and the sub breakdown for MBE inside those contracts as well. And then, Mr. Sinema, for you, if you guys could chime in on that to show us exactly that. If we know that there is a consistent level of work coming out of DOT, and we hear the director saying he needs more people to put in those positions. I know Mr. Penny would love to have more of those people in those positions. Can we get a forecast out of what has been happening and what we could have done in-house if we had put those positions in, and think about a plan to do that so that we're not consistently contracting every single solitary thing out, so that we can, again, everything that I'm saying is also in the back of my mind, thinking about that we're gonna, like I said last night, we're gonna have to change the way we budget, to change the way we operate, because we have this elephant in the room that's coming with us, going to be required to put more money into our school system, and that won't be optional. So getting ahead of that game, understanding that it's going to be a commitment that we're going to have to make, and making sure that the other agencies are operating as efficiently as possible is an important thing for us.
Mr. President, if I could add two things you said that I think bear repeating. You mentioned about the MBE, and I wanted to be aware of the fact that we are going out with an on-call contract now, which is very different from any procurement we've ever done before. And the intention of it is to allow MBE, WB, small firms to be able to compete on their own without having to be part of a team. So it's a much more complicated process, but we're optimistic that it's going to bring smaller firms into being able to work on their own and not have to go through teams. So we hope we're convinced that's going to increase opportunities for smaller firms. What was the other thing I wanted to say? Oh, I forgot I had something else, but I can't remember.
Thank you, and I think that's great. I look forward to hearing more about that in the future. My next question is, what percentage of our street parking meters are operational at any given time or non-operational? And between you guys and Parking Authority, can someone please explain to me why we haven't joined the 21st century and having a parking app for people who are parking with our meters?
Pete Little, Executive Director with the Parking Authority. I think we have our hearing tomorrow at 11, but I'll be happy
Yep.
to answer that
Yeah,
particular
will
question.
get it out the way, Peter. Thank you for being here, man.
Absolutely. Glad to finally get up. 98% of our single-space meters are in operation at any given time, and 97.8% of our multi-space parking meters are operational at any given time, on average currently. Those numbers have gone up and down a little bit over the last couple of years, but we have a good maintenance program in place right now. In regards to the parking app, the Parking Authority has tried twice over the last 7 years to bring pay by cell phone here to the city, and both times we've been detoured in trying to bring that to the city.
And detour why and by whom?
We did put out requests for proposals through the RFP twice, and in both occasions, there were technical matters that when we brought it to the Board of Estimates, it was rejected. So we are taking a different approach now. We've been working with Department of Transportation. They now have the tools to be able to enforce, actually, pay-by-cell phone payments. We partnered with them actually in the payment for that equipment as well too. And so later this year, we will be putting out a solicitation to an open solicitation for qualified pay-by-cell phone or mobile parking, mobile payment firms to offer their services here in the city as long as they're willing to abide by our terms.
So you think, you said by the end of the year we should have that up and running, you think?
We will at least start to have it. It will be in certain sections of the city, and then as we
spread it out.
expand the signage, yes, it'll expand to the rest of the city.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Mr. Chair, I have more, but I like to abide by the rules.
Thank you. Pete, just on the pay-by-meter issue, I know there were some challenges related to procurement. Those challenges have been overcome at this point?
They have, yeah. We're about to purchase some new multi-space parking meters that are pay-by-license plate parking meters, again enabled through the new equipment that enforcement has. We expect those to arrive in about a month, and we'll begin to implement those across the city, replacing the old multi-space meters that we've had here, some that are as old as 15 years old at this point.
And all of those multi-space meters will be replaced eventually?
Yes, within the next 2 years, they'll all be replaced.
Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Knight, feel bad you've been sitting back there quiet the whole time. Tim, you've been fantastic. Every time we have a right-of-way issue, you seem to have the answer right away. I really appreciate the responsiveness. How do we find out, like us on the council, what is going on in the public right-of-way? Specifically, if someone is doing utility work, is there a way that we can look that up without having to burden you with those questions?
Yeah, I believe every council member at one time had access to the Invista permit system.
Right.
If not, I can make sure everyone gets access to it.
Yes, if you could, and we can coordinate with Jeff. At once upon a time, I had a password. The problem is that in the past, and I haven't been in there in the last year, so maybe things have changed, we would frequently find that folks doing street cuts would not have their permits listed within Invista, so we wouldn't be able to figure out what was going on. Case in point, and you know, you've gotten a ton of emails from Justin from my office, and you always seem to have the answer. So I'm just wondering what the magic was. But you're getting it directly from Invista?
Most of it. So the problem that we have is for emergency work, that those locations don't get put into Invista in real time. The BG&E, Verizon, and Veolia, BGE and Verizon and Comcast have blanket permits that allows them to do certain emergency work. The requirement is that they can do the emergency work and not submit an application until at least within 18 hours of when they start work. So that is not in there real time.
Okay. And then last question.
I'm sorry, if I could
Please,
add.
please.
They still have requirements that they have to notify our traffic management center and our street cut people prior to the work. So although it's not in Invista, that our traffic people and our street cut people are aware that they're there.
Would we have the ability to call the traffic control center to find out?
I don't see why not, yeah.
So I mean, if you were to call traffic control center right now and say, hey, this intersection is being cut up, who's doing it, they would know, right?
They should.
Excuse me, can I'd like to chime in on that?
Yep.
We actually had a meeting with BGN today because they are not letting us know when they're doing emergency work. And we had a meeting with them today to say that they have to let us know. So you can call, but we may not know. We're working on them to get that straight because they use the blanket and then we'll go out and find out that they're working. But they are supposed to notify us if it is an emergency when they're out in the field.
Okay. By the end, or at the end of the hearing, or I don't want to advertise it on TV. At the end of the hearing, I'd like to get the traffic control center number, just so all the council members have that. Okay, that's very helpful. In terms of street cut policy, I know there was a policy that said if a utility cuts up the street and they cut up less than X% of it, they're not required to do curb-to-curb resurfacing. Can you refresh my memory on what that policy is?
I'm not 100% sure of it, but I can try to answer it. And maybe probably be better off doing a follow-up. But I think it has to do with the condition of the street, the number of cuts within an area, and if it's more than one lane. So.
Good evening. I'm Valerie LaCour. I'm Manager of Strategic Initiatives, and we just finished a review of the street cuts policy, looking for efficiencies. And there is, within the existing street cut policies, it's based upon the size of the cut, and there you can't just do a 1 foot cut. There's an additional amount that has to be repaved, and there is a certain size cut that does require curb to curb. We do have requirements if it's a street that's been repaved within the last 5 years that they restore it to its paved condition. We can share our review of that policy with the council at your convenience, if you'd like us to do that.
Street cut policy, and that policy is finalized now?
The policy has not changed, but the review of it and how it's applied within street cuts does have some recommendations to make it more efficient and to make sure that we have enough inspectors on the street to make sure that anybody who cuts our street.
Yeah, you're talking about the implementation of the policy.
Procedures, right. The policy is very strong.
Do you have the written procedures?
Yes, we do.
Okay, we want the procedures and the policy, please.
Okay.
Valerie, as you know, because you have a family member who lives close to me, and you recall the BG work along East Ford Avenue, and BG would come in and they would trench about 2 feet for a gas main replacement on a street that's 40 feet wide. The problem is that they tear up the street, the entire street, and I don't mean they cut it. I mean they have their heavy equipment on the street, and they just destroy the street bed. How do we fix that moving forward? And Bob, do you have any thoughts here? Because I know we're paying an arm and a leg to resurface these streets, and we know we do not have the resources to meet our need. And we know that utilities are coming in, and I don't want to say that they're being irresponsible, but they are not fixing the mess that they are creating. We got to figure out a way to do that. And I think because we own the right of way, we have the ability to dictate what the terms of making a cut in the city-owned right-of-way is, right? Do we have any thoughts on, how we're going to get more strict on that? How we're going to start demanding curb-to-curb resurfacing when BG comes in and does a gas main replacement? Because again, it's not just. It'd be one thing if it was a gas main leak and they cut a 16-foot by 16-foot square to get in there. I don't have a problem with that. The problem is when you're doing the entire length of the street.
Right. So the street cut policy does not speak directly to the weight of the equipment tearing up basically the pavement. We do have a couple of other laws that we can look at that have to do with what we call heavy or oversized loads, and we can look to see if there's something we can put in place that kind of combines the two for that utility equipment that is literally tearing up the roads as they're doing the trenches.
I'd like something in writing. Can we say by the end of June for what the plan is to start to get a better handle on this? Do you need more time? Do you need less time?
We can try by the end of June, but I'm actually going on vacation, and I won't be back until the last week of June. So I can
say July 31st.
July 31st would be great.
Okay, but I want a written comprehensive response that has actionable items in it for how we're going to hold these utilities accountable for destroying our streets, which we end up having to assume the cost for. And I know that gives Daniel and Bob a lot of heartburn, right? I feel your guys' heart rate increasing right now just thinking about it, right?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it because there's not much more that burns me up outside of violent crime than that.
Absolutely.
It's really ridiculous what they're doing.
Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Sneed.
Thank you. Can somebody explain to me how we ran out of concrete?
The concern of running out of concrete, which is where we buy bulk cement, the master blanket contract for the entire city expired. Purchasing did not renew this contract or extended it on time. It not just affected DOT, but it affected DPW and any other agency that gets bulk cement. It just recently, I believe, is either been to the Board of Estimates or about to go to the Board of Estimates for final approval. And therefore, all agencies should be able to put in their requisitions through the appropriate procurement process and hopefully get material within a short period of time.
Whose shop does this fall under to make sure that we have concrete?
The master blanket contract is set up for the entire city, meaning DPW and DOT, and like I said, other agencies. I would think that the responsibility should have been upon purchasing or procurement. It's not actually signed off by one individual agency. It's a master blanket contract.
Yeah, procurement is a bureau within the Department of Finance, reports through directly to the director through Henry.
So is that who we need to hold responsible for? Because streets aren't being, sidewalks aren't being,
so probably be best to start with the bureau chief. Her name is Erin Scher. I'm not familiar with this particular issue, but she would be the one that would know what, if any, the issue was in this particular case.
I feel like if that's a part of someone's job, and if they're not going to do their job to make sure that streets are safe, that we don't have cement, the person probably shouldn't have their job because that means they're not doing their job. So I would hope that we see this person so we can bring this up so this doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Councilwoman, I think we already saw finance and procurement. Yeah. So I don't even know what to add to the list. At least
put it as a follow-up. I'm sure she would know the situation, the chief of that bureau. So if you put it as a follow-up, we'll get it to her.
Yeah, and we, I think to add to that, if there's any knowledge about other situations where we have run out of something that's critical. I know that, for example, in DPW, and I don't know if this was procurement, they ran out of a particular valve, I think, related to water repairs, and so we weren't able to, as far as new development, there was some development of businesses that weren't able to open because they couldn't get the proper valves. Is that a procurement thing as well? I see you shaking your head, Bob.
Yeah, so like anything in the operating budget on contracting does go through the Bureau of Procurement. The larger construction capital projects go through a shop in DPW. So that sounds like something that would have gone through procurement, but I'm not familiar with that particular issue.
Is there a mechanism in place to monitor
I
or
don't know.
audit
It's
procurement? Because
I'm not familiar with it. It's within finance, but it's not within the budget office. So I would defer definitely to Erin to answer that question. I'm sure they have a policy about renewals of contracts and what the agency's role is and what the central role is. I'm just not intimately familiar with it.
Councilwoman Sneed?
Frank, do we know how many projects are delayed because we don't have concrete? How many projects you guys been affected by, or how many city residents are being inconvenienced?
Most of our capital projects, of course, would be contractors bringing their own supplies. This would affect our local crews. Anything?
To my knowledge, the cement that we need.
You gotta use the microphone. We're recording. Use the microphone.
The cement that we purchase is used for our internal crews to perform maintenance and/or repair to sidewalks, curbs, streets of that nature. It doesn't affect any major projects that's currently going on within the maintenance division.
So when I say major project, that's a good thing, but I feel like my residents are a major concern in my neighborhood. So if it's, I don't care how small it is, it still affects them as city residents.
And I clearly understand and exactly what you're referencing. Like if, for example, if you needed curb repairs done and it called for 20 feet of concrete to be installed, we would not be able to install that 20 feet of concrete because we could not get the cement. So I do understand exactly what you're talking about. So they would be general maintenance and repair requests, yes.
Thank you.
I had a question for Theo. As the person who's responsible for, I guess, implementation and monitoring of any equity measures that we, and I know we're early on in this, but I'm just kind of curious. Tonight, you've heard quite a bit request for a variety of different projects. Some require resources, some require time as far as planning. As thinking forward as it relates to equity, do you believe that there'll come a time when you'll have to tell a body like this that those requests are going to have to wait because they don't fit in with our equity analysis? I mean, because right now, I could imagine, if your equity measures were in place, we could be throwing, your time schedules and your priorities completely off by saying, oh, we need for you to go down to Fayette and Gay and fix that, when that doesn't fit into your equity model. Or I send you over here and say fix that, and it doesn't. How do you anticipate that working? Coming before committees like this.
It's I think the timing of your question, Mr. Vice Chair, is critical because a lot of initiatives that we are currently undergoing will actually culminate around October with us having the draft of the complete street manual being out for public review, with us having to provide to this board the actual equity analysis that we will be conducting. And on top of that, clearly the complete street bill, as it got enacted as a law last fall, is telling us already that there are elements of equity that should be taken into consideration as we invest in transportation. So this, I guess what I'm saying is, nothing prevents us from looking at current transportation projects through the lenses of equity, nothing. But as we ramp up a couple of initiatives, and then on top of this, as we hopefully develop a comprehensive plan, what you will find out is that, in fact, most of our ongoing projects will be looked at through the lenses of equity. Mm-hmm. I'm adding to this the fact that, of course, our dockless vehicle program is about to be launched as a permanent program, and that also does involve and include a piece that relates to the deployment of the vehicles that has to be done on an equity basis as well. Most of what we do now, really, not just because of the pressure that we are getting from elected officials, most of what we do really is about rethinking how some areas have been disinvested when it comes to transportation. It is clearly one thing that is in my mind as I get many calls regarding all areas of the city for traffic management, for example. We are looking at this. It's a starting point. We clearly can be saying that, yes, as we move forward, everything like requests that we get tomorrow would be looked at through those. But it's definitely something that is in the back of our mind right now, moving forward.
Thank you. There's a corridor that I think is critical to the city. North Avenue cuts through, I think, 4 council districts, going from Hilton to Milton. The MTA is either already or about to initiate, North Avenue Rising, $27 million, almost $30 million of investment along the corridor. Can you tell me what other investments DOT is making along that corridor now, or plans on phasing in over the next several years?
Ms. LaCour would try to explain this and add to the question. One thing I can say is that as far as the North Avenue Rising project itself, the federal grant, MTA-led project, we are working in partnership with them, and we are getting some money to go along with project that becomes ours. So bike lanes on Baker Street and 21st Street, those are elements of that overall plan that we are getting money from MTA to implement.
Okay.
So I'm saying there is clearly a collaboration there. Valerie.
So Valerie LaCour again. So the North Avenue Rising is a set kit of things that MTA has put forward in the Tiger Grant. In association with that, the Department of Transportation is getting ready to start construction on the roadway section of the Pennsylvania North Avenue. We also have some of our resurfacing in the Orange Cone, which are on some of the side streets that currently are not part of the nodes that MTA has done. So we are making sure that when we touch the intersections of North Avenue that we're making it look seamless as if it's part of the project. We're also working with some developments that are along North Avenue to make sure that they are partnering with us to put in the North Avenue typical section, so that as more developments want to be on there, the corridor continues to look complete, and at the end of the day, hopefully will be a complete street. And then we're also working with our partnering agency, the Baltimore Development Corporation. They have identified some additional funds that they would like for DOT to look at in augmenting or expanding the nodes that MTA has identified to try to pull it down the corridor. And we're currently looking for 3 locations, one in the east, one in the central, and one in the west with BDC.
Okay. That was the first I've heard of BDC identifying additional resources. If we can put that as another item, I'd like to hear more about what those resources are and what 3 nodes you are considering.
Okay, sure.
Councilman Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So I had a question about the retrofitting of the highway poles versus the pedestrian poles when we're doing the LED replacements. And the question I have, actually, it's a 2-parter. The first one is, it has not been my observation that when we're replacing the highway poles for LEDs, that we are physically moving the poles anywhere, which is probably cheaper, but I'm curious as to whether or not this has any impact on the ADA situation for the sidewalks, because my experience with ADA has been that if you don't do anything to something that is not ADA compliant, then you don't get in trouble. But as soon as you need to do some kind of replacement or repair to it, then the feds expect ADA to be complied with. So we have numerous cases around the city where our sidewalks are not ADA compliant because there are light poles that block what would be a normal width on the sidewalk. If we take those poles out, but then replace them with new poles in exactly the same position, are we putting ourselves at massive risk of ADA liability?
Valerie LaCour again. I'm also the DOT's ADA coordinator. And basically, I deal with what we call the external complaints. Those are the complaints that we get from our constituents around the city. It's estimated that 95% of Baltimore City is not ADA compliant. So this is a citywide issue. We are working with the federal government, FHWA. When we get a complaint, we have a team that goes out to investigate to figure out what the immediate fix is. The poles in the middle of the sidewalk are a definite issue. If we can get the minimum clearance on one side of the pole or the other, we try to do that. The idea is any new streets, new sidewalks, new poles that are going in need to be repositioned either at the very front of the sidewalk or at the back of the sidewalk so that we have a good ADA compliant clear distance. And we've been working with BGE on some of their poles, and they have agreed that future poles that go in, they won't put them in the middle of the sidewalk, but it does require us to be vigilant to make sure that happens. When we do get a complaint, hopefully before it ends up in a lawsuit or a federal complaint, we at DOT are very committed to fixing each individual complaint that comes in. We do ramps. We will make sure that we get sidewalk behind or in front of poles if we have to do a bump out, whatever we need to do, to make sure that individual complaints are taken care of. While Alma said she's working on the inventory of the city, and part of that is the sidewalks to see if they're compliant. And then we must submit a plan to the federal government, which is called our transition plan, of how the city plans to make sure that at some point in the future, the city of Baltimore is ADA compliant.
So that's kind of where I was getting to. So does that plan say that whenever we're replacing poles, we should be taking that opportunity to replace that pole in an ADA compliant manner?
So the draft transition plan does say that. We aren't prevented from submitting that plan to the federal government until the inventory is done. We're also going to make sure that our complete streets manual and policy and procedures that Theo's group is working on, make sure that if we're doing a complete street, we're not putting a pole in the middle of the sidewalk. It must be at the back of the sidewalk or at the curb so that we can have a actual ADA compliant sidewalk.
So
and that will be a policy of DOT in the future.
Okay, so just to be clear, when you say when we're putting a pole, like that includes replacing an existing pole?
If we're taking out the pole down to the foundation, we need to put the new foundation in so that we have a compliant space, which means it's at the curb or it's at the back of the curb, not in the middle sidewalk anymore.
Okay, and now this leads into the second reason why I'm asking this question. There's an issue of the ADA compliance, and then there's also an issue of how much lighting is being provided. And where I'm getting from that is I understand we've been all very excited about this LED conversion and how much money that we're saving in moving from the old lights to the LEDs. I share your enthusiasm for saving money. However, I have also noticed that the new lights, while technically as bright or brighter directly under them, purposefully do not spill light in the same way that the old instruments did. While I can see a definite engineering advantage to that, I am thinking particularly of York Road, which is 5 lanes wide for much of it. The old York Road lighting was fine because the lights on each side of it not only lit the sidewalks underneath, but also spilled in every direction, and in doing so gave the whole corridor the sense of being well lit. Since we have switched to the LEDs, we now drive down a street which feels darker, and we drive through pools of light because the spill of the LEDs does not meet the middle of the road, and it does not go back as far into the pedestrian area as it used to. And I have held off of flatly asking for pedestrian street lighting to be moved around so as to better address this, because I understand how expensive that would be. But since we have this plan, or since we're trying to get to an ADA compliant city, is there a plan that I can ask to be adjusted so that these new LED lights that we're trying to move to will actually light all of the same area that used to be lit by the former lights?
So I'm not a lighting engineer, so I'm gonna have to turn that over to our lighting engineer to talk about how the difference between the old lights and the new lights light in here. I'm giving him time to get up here. I will tell you from a pedestrian point of view, there are two types of lighting. There's the street lighting, which is obviously the Cobra heads. And that street lighting is not intended to serve as pedestrian lighting. There is also a need in citywide to have pedestrian lighting so that people can enjoy the sidewalks later into the evening, feel safe when they're waiting at bus stops. And we understand that, and that is part of the Complete Streets plan that is being worked on, again, in Theo's group. And it's also part of ADA accessibility to make sure that people can see where they're going and get there safely. And I'll turn it over to Brent to talk about the difference in lighting.
So, yeah, as you're coming up, say specifically, when we had a streetscape change on York Road just a few years back, and people were very excited about the new pedestrian lights that were coming. And when we looked at pictures of what they would look like, we were shown examples of ones on 36th Street in Hamden, and people had been to Hamden and they thought, ooh, Hamden is nice and well lit at night. Then we got ours on York Road, and York Road didn't look like that. And as far as I can tell, there are two major differences. One is York Road is substantially wider than 36th Street, so the lights on one side of the street didn't get to reinforce with the other, but also they seem to be spaced closer on West 36th Street than they are on York Road. And so how do we go about having maybe this is a way we can draw on the equity fund to make certain that everybody's commercial corridor gets the same level of instrumentation to ensure a higher lighting level so that people can walk with a feeling of safety at night?
Yes, sir. My name's Brent Hooper. I'm acting chief for the maintenance division. What you're talking about was the streetscape, which was engineered through our tech division.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Once they are put in, the maintenance division takes over. Okay, so once it's engineered, they have lighting engineers that go out there or have the plans and say, okay, this is what's going to light it up. So what we can do is we can actually go out there and do a lighting analysis to see if we need to get different kinds of lighting distributions put out there. Because I don't know what the lighting distribution, usually it's a type 2 distribution, which throws the lights, light sideways and not out. If it's a type 3, it gives a circle around the whole pole.
Okay.
Type 5 gives it more light in the front and back of the pole. So I'd have to actually do a lighting survey to see what's causing the dark spots.
Okay.
And if the lights are too far apart, maybe we can change those lights. And I'm not saying we can, I'm just saying maybe we can.
That's an option, right? Okay.
Maybe change those pods out of the pedestrian lights and get a different distribution pod to put in there.
So the first thing is, that's great. I would love to take you up on the opportunity to have that assessment done. And Jeff, I think we would ask that to be a formal request. But I'd also like to understand how are we proactively, other than complaints from people about they're trying to get by on a certain stretch of sidewalk, how are we proactively going about, I'm trying to figure out the best way. Maybe I should ask for, could we get a copy of this transition plan that you haven't sent to the federal government yet because the inventory hasn't been completed? And I guess this is more back for Val. Like, if there is already a plan for shifting poles throughout the entire city so as to avoid ADA concerns, could we get a copy of that plan?
Certainly, I can provide an advanced draft, and we can come in if you want and talk about what's the requirements for the transition plan for the federal government and how it fits in with complete streets. And I think your question actually speaks to complete streets because commercial areas need to have a certain look. Residential areas need to have a certain look,
right.
Not one size fits all. And I think that's an excellent comment to take back for when we do the complete streets plan to make sure that we are looking at the ambiance of our streets at night, not just during the day.
The more you're describing it, the more I'm thinking I'm going to actually take that out. That's not going to be a request for you. I do want to leave in the assessment for York Road. I think that would be important. But Mr. Chair, I'm actually going to, on my own, reach out to Councilman Dorsey and Councilman Reisinger and suggest that maybe we should just have a separate hearing on that topic because that would be a conversation that I would imagine would be a little involved, and I don't want to waste that on just like dragging you over so that you can explain it to me when there probably are other council people who would care also. So why don't we just do a hearing?
Sure, and we can bring our lighting engineer to explain the different, including Brent, but bring our tech lighting engineer to explain what we're talking about when we talk about it looks like this and looks like that.
Yeah,
so,
okay.
Okay.
That sounds great. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Director Murphy, or actually, who's got bike lane stuff under their portfolio? Theo, you look like you need another bike lane question. I think I'm good, Frank. Or
we can tag team.
Yeah. Frank, feel free to sit, unless you want to stand. That's fine.
Could I just add something that might help the process too? I'm in the process of working with Liam to set up meetings for each council person, just to make sure that everybody knows what kind of services we can provide. I know most of you know, of course, but I want to make sure every council person knows all the kinds of services we provide, how they can engage us, how to reach us. And if there's anything, I know some of the things tonight are things that we need to have more discussions on. I want to make sure to make that offer to all of the council people that I'd be happy to include that in those meetings. We met with Councilman Burnett and Councilman Cohen so far, and I still have everybody else to meet with, but I wanted to, we'd be willing any time to talk about any of these matters.
No, that'd be great. Theo, as I'm sure you're aware, there is a issue with the cycle track facility, the Maryland cycle track facility, specifically on Liberty Street. That would be in between Saratoga and my brain's not working right now. I want to, you know what I'm talking about, right? On the backside of Charles Plaza. Yep. We have a fix in place. Meg and her team have approved. This goes back to 1 or 2 cycle track planners. The fix is approved. We've had 2 near fatal cycle accidents there in the last 2 months. And we have been told that that fix cannot be implemented until the end of June. And now, as late as the end of summer, because we only have one contractor who has the on call, who has the capacity to do that project. My understanding is that someone spoke with that contractor as they were dealing with the issue on East Monument Street, which I don't want to get into because it's outside of my district.
Thank you.
And they confirmed that they had been directed by the city to handle all of that stuff before they handle this fix. I really need this fix put in place. Is this something that you can handle for me? It's a one-day job.
Absolutely, Mr. Chair. I'll look into this. What you have heard and have described is exactly what happens. We have capacity issues even with our contractors, but yes, we will be bumping that up so that it becomes a priority for us. We've been made aware of the 2 near fatal incidents recently in the past 2 months. It is on top. I mean, safety is paramount to us. So I will give you that as a commitment. We will make that our next priority.
That'll be the top priority moving forward on the cycle track stuff? Okay. And
Yes,
when,
sir.
when do you think can we get to that, this week or next week?
I will talk to my folks in tech to see in terms of mobilization, if in fact the contractors that you referred to have started to move away from the east side of the town, because that is supposed to be almost done. So I can provide you with a clear answer in terms of the schedule, but it will become by next priority.
Penny, can you give me a realistic time frame, just because I'm assuming you're going to be talking with Charles, right?
Yes, and of course Kirk and the folks that Intech and Mohammed, who's we will give you a sense of schedule by the end of this week.
By the end of this week. So we're not talking like end of June or end of summer. We're talking like an expedited sense of urgency.
We will treat it as a sense of urgency.
Top priority, like number one priority.
Yes, sir. Say that again. I do, but no, I will bring that up. Mr. Chair.
I was about to say I was his favorite council member. Go ahead, finish.
No, we will definitely bring that up as one of our top priorities.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
And I'm going to follow up with an email to the folks who've been working on this and make sure I copy you and Frank so that we're all on the same page, just to memorialize this conversation. Can we get back to, is Colby still here?
No, he's not.
Does anyone want to talk circulator with me? All right. Or willing to. I don't know about want to.
We are all willing to, Mr. Chair.
Always willing to, yes.
So I'm still struggling with the decision to purchase 6 buses now and 6 buses a year from now. And I spoke with Bob, and my understanding is that debt service for an expenditure in the range of $3 million is approximately 4.25%, which would be about $170,000, if my math is correct, $180,000. What is preventing us from finding the funding to make that happen? Because we have 12 buses that are halfway through their life. They're getting retrofits, new stuff under the hood, new interiors, right? So that's good. So we expect another 6 years out of them. And we're getting 6 more. That brings us to 18. We know that the current schedule requires 20 buses. Purple, 7 buses. Orange route is 6, green is 5, and banner is 2 for a total of 20. So we're going to be running at a deficiency anyway, and that's if all of our buses are operating, right? So can we bump it up to 8? Can we bump it up to 10? What can we do?
Question for Bob.
So, the amount that's allocated this year is the 2.6 million that can handle 6 buses. We had actually worked with DOT to kind of map out a longer-term schedule, and we want to be able to have consistent funding so that we can replace both things that are coming due on their normal schedule and have enough each year in the budget to handle anything that's an emergency that comes up. So we had mapped out that schedule. I don't have it in front of me, but we can show that to you. We felt like that was a better model that would save the city a little bit of financing cost over the long term, that if we just budgeted each year for an amount to actually purchase buses outright, that would be the most cost effective strategy. So we can get that and share that with you, what it looks like in the long term.
Jeff, can you add that to the list, the schedule for the replacement of buses? It may be the most cost-effective. I respectfully disagree and do not think it's the most common sense approach. I hope that I'm wrong and that your calculations are correct or your projections are correct, that we're not going to be running the system at a deficit. Moving forward, I would also ask, considering that all 4 of the lines run through my district and probably 60% of the stops in the city are in my district, that you would keep me updated moving forward. And I know, Charles, you've done a good job of that, but I want to be kept in the loop, so I'm aware of what's happening so that I can communicate what's going on with my constituents. Are you guys good with that?
Point well taken, Mr.
Thank
Chair.
you. Thank you very much. Mr. President?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to ask a question about the circulator, and don't everyone get nervous all at once. But thinking about the circulator in the lens of equity and thinking about how we evolve around that, my question is when we're now moving into a lens of equity and thinking about services like the circulator, can you guys tell me about how you will use that for that service? For example, we know that the previous director had talked to us about expansion of lines from the circulator, which I immediately responded that what the lines that were quote unquote proposed would not be in line with the equity law. Have you guys thought about that through? Maybe you guys are coming to us next year or the year after that saying that we're going to create a new line of the circulator and it's going to run down Pennsylvania Avenue to come downtown, or it's going to run down Green Mountain Avenue to come downtown, or it's going to run down Bel Air Road to come downtown?
Mr. President, if I may say that I'm going to preface this by saying that the original intent of the Charm City Circulator was not to create a parallel transit service to what MTA is currently providing to the city. Its original intent was really to serve the downtown district in a way that no one has done it prior to, free of charge and frequent and reliable. So if we go back 12 years ago, that's where we were. The intent was really to create a shuttle system. I'm sure you do. So as we are moving forward with those ideas of expansion, well, number one, we are in the verge of executing a contract with a new provider. There are a lot of things that will not be part of that contract that could be added to at a later time, but the contract as it stands right now does not call for expansion of services. So that's one. Two, I really believe that at the end of the day, it becomes a budget question. The circulator originally was, the services were funded through our tax revenues, and the federal government is adding 3 million, has been adding 3 million for the past 5 years. Now it's going to get down to 2. We are losing funding sources to supplement that service. So we're going the opposite way. If in fact we are to think of how to expand the service, yes, we would then be thinking about a lot of other components that we have to add to this. We are open to the idea, but if I were to be candid with my words, I think it's a long shot as we speak, just because of the funding issue. But if you are to provide additional, and I'm making this up, funding for the circulator, we will be looking at, in the long run, the possibility of expanding the service.
And so, Ms. Penny,
I'm sorry, just to kind of piggyback off what Theo has said, we should also be considering this as a multimodal option. So not just the expansion of service for the circulator, but looking at different equity components such as microtransit that can get people from East Baltimore to those connecting spots where the circulator is to get them in town. This is also a part of our bike lane program. There's a reason why we are developing bike lanes, because it's just another form of transportation. It's a lot cheaper to have a bike than a car sometimes. Now, maybe it's not as free as the circulator, but that's just another multimodal option that we have. And the equity study that we're doing from BRTB is actually looking at the transit deserts that we have in the city, and figuring how can we get people from Northwest Baltimore down to where the jobs are, maybe in the harbor area or wherever the different centers are, the institutions. So we are looking at different models such as that. We've also been investigating, looking at how we can partner with our local institutions who operate shuttle services like Johns Hopkins or University of Maryland at Baltimore. So it's not just the circulator, we are multimodal, so we're trying to think of different elements because we do have these constraints of budget. So.
Thank you, and thank you for that, Mr. Penny. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's about figuring out if we're going to offer a free service for some, we're going to have to offer it for all or do things in critical ways in order to be in equity, because we know that once you guys are scoring everything on equity, you won't be able to come in here without lying and saying that the circulator is an equitable service. But I think that we should talk about everything that Mr. Penny is. We think it's a valuable service to the city, but we want to see how we can have that be expanded. My next question is a little different, but it's involving around.
Mr. President, if Councilman Henry has a follow-up to your question.
Sure, Mr. Henry.
Yeah, Mr. President, I just wanted to build on one thing that Theo had mentioned when you were talking about the origination of the circulator. Originally, it was paid for just out of the additional parking tax revenue, and the justification for where it served was that these were the neighborhoods and areas most impacted by the additional parking revenue. And so the fact that it just served those areas, that was the rationale. And what I would just like to point out is that over the years of the circulator's existence, as service has expanded, we have also expanded into taking direct general fund revenue in order to support the continuation of the circulator and technically the expansion of it. And once we cross that threshold of it's no longer just being paid for by that parking tax revenue, now that it's being paid for out of general funds, and from this it looks like it's getting close to a 50-50 split. It was like 6 point something in parking tax revenue, 2 million in state grant, which is declining, and 6 million from general fund revenue. All of the city is contributing to running a free bus service for just some neighborhoods. And that is what I think the president is getting at, is it would be hard to point to right now a more inequitable city service than the circulator in terms of the number of people in the city who are contributing to operating a system that is not coming anywhere near being useful to them. And so next year, when we come back and look at this, if we're going to see 40+% of the operations being paid for out of general funds, we should see 40% of the city outside of the downtown core being served by the circulator. And I think that's a pretty straightforward expectation in terms of equity. Thank you.
Point well taken, Councilman Henry.
So just a follow-up, Ms. Penny and Theo. Those shuttles, Hopkins, University of Maryland, what we should know is the College Town shuttle, do they have to get permits in order to operate, or something from the city in order to operate in the city?
Hi, Tim Knight. They don't get any permits from Department of Transportation. I don't know if they're required to have like a commercial vehicle type license or something from the United States DOT like trucks have, but they're nothing from us.
So you guys don't do a permitting process, so I could start the Brandon Scott shuttle and just run it and have it? Okay, great. That's something that we will revisit in the near future. Thank you for the answer. Next question is about our impound lot, 6200 Pulaski Highway. I want to talk about a few things around that property. Not the operations per se, but as you guys know, I think that one, that location is, because of the way public transportation is in our state, is very inaccessible. So if I have my car towed, the last place that I wanted to end up is at 6200 Pulaski Highway, because it's virtually impossible for me to get there without a car. Can we talk about if the department has looked at other cities, especially those that are like size to Baltimore, and how they deal with their impound lot? For a few reasons, this is why I'm questioning this, not just because I have to drive past it every day to and from my way to City Hall, but more importantly, I believe that when I visit other cities and talk to my colleagues in other cities, their impound lots are in a more central location. They're also a lot of them are on the ground. They're also not using what is prime industrial and retail space and taking it off of the tax rails to do that. Has the department looked at that at Pulaski? Because there are cars that have been sitting there on that lot literally the entire time I've been in City Hall, and I came to City Hall on September the 4th of 2007. So have we looked at those kind of studies and analysis about that particular property?
Yeah, we actually have two lots. We have 410 Fallsway that we use for our peak.
But I'm talking specifically, yeah.
Yes, and it hasn't been looked at since I've been there. We have started the process of looking for a second tow yard to assist with, maybe something on the west side or something easier to get to. It is very hard to get to the yard. There's one bus that runs out there, and it probably runs once an hour.
So and then he has to come forward. We can't hear. I couldn't hear a word that he said.
He said it's close to 95, but I said, but you're talking about for...
Yeah, that 95 doesn't matter if my car is sitting in the yard. The next question about that is the length of time that the cars stay there, because there are cars that have been there for literally 12 years.
There are cars there that are on police hold that have been there, I think the longest is since 2009. We've been having a good turnaround with getting them out for auction and people picking them up. It's gotten better, but it's with VRI we're constantly bringing in, so we may sell 240, but I might bring in 275.
So I guess the follow-up is this, Mr. Amoros, how many vehicles are currently at 6200 Pulaski, and how many have been there for, let's say, 3 years or more, 5 years or more, 10 years or more? Because then the question we'll ask the police department is, why on earth would they hold a car since 2009? Because any evidence that was in that car in 2009 in 2019 is not going to be there, because we know that the cars probably have the window down, the windows busted, or if they were talking about the outside of the car, whatever they're talking about is dry rotted and gone away. So we'll have to follow up with them about them creating a better policy for you guys to operate on, because you shouldn't be taking space. And because I know this operation pretty well, it's also, as you know, has led to some of our towing partners having to store cars on their particular lots, which led to council members, mainly Councilman Dorsey and myself, getting calls about a particular tower storing cars on their lot that they were not zoned for, but it was kind of hard for the city to give a citation for something that the business was doing on behalf of the city. Exactly. So, but also, Mr. Sinema, this is something that I'll follow up with you about, in particular about the usage of that particular property, because there's also some portions of it that we don't use, and I think that we could find a better centralized and probably more efficient, money efficient space to do this in the long term. Thank you, sir. Okay. My next question is one that I talk about each and every, actually 1 second. So we spoke earlier about enforcement agents and folks that go out. I know is Mr. Goodwin, Chief, you still here? There he is. So, Chief, and this is something I'm going to be asking to a lot of the operational agencies as I try to push us to think about how we operate city government differently. So, can you run through again for me just really quickly the hours that your folks work?
Yes, sir. We start out from 4 a.m. to 12 noon. That's our scofflaw, our booting operation. From 6 to 2, we have about 4 squads, 3 of which are traffic and point control. 1 is abandoned. 8 to 4 is parking enforcement and point control. 11 to 7 is a combination of a small scofflaw squad, a small abandoned squad, and point control and traffic enforcement. And then we have 2 squads that come on from 3 to 11, and they're both doing traffic.
And it's 3 a.m. to 11, 3 a.m. to 11 a.m.?
4 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Okay, thank you. So between the hours after 11 p.m., how many enforcement people do you have out?
No one.
None. Thank you.
4 a.m. to 11 p.m. is the total operation.
Total operation. So, Chief, have we thought about, or have you, well, I know you have, has the agency thought about changing that model or evolving to having a shift model where there are people consistently out throughout the evening, like the police department and others, so that we know that a lot of these complaints come in late night? I know you get the calls from myself and others about that. And if you had folks that were working, and we understand that would be changes to union contracts and negotiations, but we have to start somewhere and thinking about how we operate differently, and we can be more efficient in doing that. You won't have to pay people to come in. We won't have to do all these other things. Have you guys thought about that kind of model and what it would mean?
Mr. President, we are in the process right now trying to put together an overnight team from, say, 10 to 6. My concern with that right now at the present moment is to make sure we fill some of these gaps that we have right now, and then we can move into that model. We've been talking about it for the last year. We just did not have the personnel to extend ourselves, because if we put a 10 to 6 shift on, that will shorten us on the daytime. So that is in the process. As soon as we can really fill some of these gaps and fill some of these part-time positions, we have the personnel who've already volunteered to do it. It's not a union issue. We can just put another shift up and they would bid for the shift, and we can make that happen.
And thank you. Mr. Sinema, do we know about fiscal impacts of that, or if we think that there's significant fiscal gains from him having folks out at night? My guess is that most enforcement agents almost at least write their salaries in the year.
Yeah, I mean, this is something we want to work with DOT on, because if there are additional personnel, we could justify that with increase in revenue. It actually could be a net, an overall net benefit for the city, but we'd have to work out the numbers and figure out how many citations would we expect to be issued and et cetera, and what would the
Yes, sir. I think
look like.
I'll look forward to hearing more about it. Thank you. And my last thing, Mr. Chair, is around concrete. We know that this is something that's critically important to me and other folks across the city, but specifically around concrete neighborhood streets. Can anyone give an update about funding sources and where we are for neighborhood concrete streets? And also, sir, if we, what was told to us in the past, and as you know, is that if a street is concrete, even if it's on some side street, we're not allowed to overlay that with asphalt. Can we talk about if that practice or policy has changed?
Good evening. My name is Bimal Deputa. I'm Chief of Engineering and Construction.
Yes, sir. Pull the mic down a little bit closer. We can't hear you.
Okay. This year we have capital projects. It's a 5-way.
Sir, pull the mic over to you. Like, pull it a little closer to you.
Okay. I thought that's what it was.
Yeah, you're good.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
That guy he left Verizon, he went to Sprint.
Okay. Well, we have this year a capital project which is 508-465. It's a combined curb repair, slab repair, and ADA ramp upgrade citywide. We have $1.85 million. Last year we didn't have any funding for those concrete slab repairs. So this year we don't have identified project, but it's citywide. But I know in Northeast District has more concrete roadways there.
We can definitely get you a list of those in short haste.
Right. And then the second question you asked me about this, whether we can overlay those concrete streets. We have one restriction, I call it the flow line along the curb. If the curb, our standard curb heights are normally 6 inches high, 8 inches, but again for car parking we allow only 6 inches. If we have already overlaid and that somehow the curb height is not more than 4 inches, we cannot overlay because that will overshoot the flow during the runoff, and the runoff will be overshot. So we have to do some engineering assessment before we overlay, but we can definitely do that.
Thank you, and I will let us get out of here on this last thing. If someone, you don't have to do it right now, if someone could reach out to provide an update about the Bel Air Road streetscape, and also be prepared to provide that to the new councilwoman as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I got one last thing. It'll be quick, I promise. What type of feedback are you getting on this scooter pilot or the scooter program? It's no longer a pilot.
Mr. Chair, literally positive feedback in general. There is a sense of course, positive feedback coming from a younger crowd. I think we have folks between 18 and 30, roughly, who are the users, the heavy users, and who really want to see this as a permanent program. We do get positive feedbacks also about competition, because we do have 4 providers now, and literally we have a choice, not just in terms of pricing, but we have a choice of vehicles. We have had a couple of complaints, nothing, if you were to ask me, nothing astronomical about some vehicles being dropped in areas where they shouldn't. All this is going to be taken care of once the regs and regulations are really put out, along with the program becoming permanent. So we are giving the residents 30 days to review our regs and rules and regulations. We're going to be posting it on our website this week. This is going to give us a better understanding of where people are. But overall, the feedback has been hugely positive.
Thank you, and thank you to everyone for DOT for staying with us tonight and for everything you do for our city. And Frank, I'd like to point out one person from DOT, and that's Liam Davis. Liam Davis. Since Liam has joined your agency, as you know, one of the things that I've talked about is issues with communication. The communication has been flowing back and forth the way it's supposed to be. Liam has truly done an excellent job representing your agency, not only to the city council and the mayor's office, but to other city agencies. So I want you to know how appreciative, and I think I speak for everyone up here, when I talk about the impact that Liam has had since he's come there in the short time he's been there.
And I told him the same thing this morning, right? Leo?
All right, he's blushing. On that note, we're in recess.
Thank you.
We'll be back in session tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Thank you.